Robert Baratheon remembered the smell of roasted boar, the tang of iron in its blood, the smoldering aroma of smoke, and the sweetness of wine-soaked fat dripping into the flames. He remembered the sensation of being weightless and unbound, afloat in a dreamscape thick with shadows. He felt the faint memory of a scorching ember pressed to his chest, then to his lips, and a voice chanting in a language he could not grasp. From the depths of a darkness that roiled like an angry sea, he felt hands tugging him back to life. He woke gasping, lungs searing with the taste of salt and ash, and the first sight that greeted him was Melisandre's red eyes gleaming in the torchlight of some forgotten corridor. She wore red robes that glimmered with the faint reflection of distant flames, her scarlet hair tumbling about her shoulders like living fire. At first, Robert thought he was in a dream, or perhaps in a nightmare conjured by the wine he had consumed in such dangerously large quantities. He tried to speak, but all he could manage was a guttural rasp. His throat felt scorched, as though he had gulped down liquid flame. He turned his head, and in doing so became vaguely aware of his surroundings. He lay in a cool, torchlit cavern, the walls slick with condensation, the air close and sharp. Faint plumes of mist escaped his lips, vanishing as quickly as they formed. Melisandre hovered over him, her voice curiously soft. "You are king," she said, her accent lilting, the words spoken with uncharacteristic gentleness. "And you belong to the Lord of Light now. You have returned for a purpose." Robert blinked. He tried to recall the shape of his last living memory. The boar, the savage creature that had shredded his body and left him bleeding out in some dank corner of the forest. There had been a searing agony in his gut, then pain in his chest, and then darkness. He remembered men crying, shouting his name. He remembered the coppery taste of blood filling his mouth. He had died. He was sure of it. But somehow he lived. With a trembling hand, he touched his torso, expecting to find tattered flesh. Instead, he felt the smooth fabric of a newly wrapped bandage. Melisandre placed a hand over his, her ruby bracelet flickering. He felt a heat emanate from her palm, not painful but distinct, like the sun's glow on bare skin. "You will feel weak for a time," she said, "but the Lord of Light has chosen to restore you. Trust in his flame, your grace." Robert's eyes flickered around the cavern as his bearings gradually returned. He did not trust this sorceress, never had. She served Stannis, or so it was said, but apparently she had done the unthinkable. She had saved Robert from the grave. 1,000 questions crowded Robert's tired mind, battling one another for primacy. Where was Cersei? What had become of the 7 kingdoms? Who sat the Iron Throne in King's Landing? And what was the fate of his old friend Ned Stark? The mere thought of Ned plunged a dagger of guilt into Robert's chest. Ever since he'd taken the throne and married Cersei Lannister, everything had grown complicated, burdened with court intrigues and illusions. He remembered suspecting the parentage of Joffrey. He remembered dimly that Ned had discovered some dark truth about the line of succession. In his final days, Robert had waffled between wanting to do the right thing and simply giving in to the liquor. He had died before he could set things right, and now, resurrected, he felt as though the time for half measures was done. He had been pulled out of death for a reason. That reason must surely be to rectify the mistakes he had allowed to fester. "Where is Ned Stark?" Robert croaked, his voice scraping like stone against stone. Melisandre's calm expression gave away little, but Robert saw a flicker of something in her red eyes. "In the black cells, as far as I know," she said. "Your brother Stannis believed that upon your death, Joffrey would claim the throne, and Ned Stark's execution would secure the Lannister hold on the capital. But the Red Woman saw another path. I learned of your predicament in a vision. A crowned stag falling beneath a boar, and the shadows closing in. The Lord of Light commanded me to act." Robert's heart pounded. Visions. Stannis. That name conjured a swirl of complicated emotion. His brother had never been one for trifles. If he had a new priestess or advisor, it would mean he was dangerously serious about claiming the Iron Throne. But that was the least of Robert's immediate concerns. If Ned was in the black cells, that meant his loyal friend was in mortal peril. Cersei or Joffrey, or both of them together, must have turned on him the moment Robert's life hung in the balance. Another wave of shame hit him. If only he had listened more carefully to Ned. If only he had not turned to wine to dull his sense of looming betrayal. Above all, if only he had guarded his friend better against the vipers in the Red Keep. But now it was done, and Ned was a prisoner, the realm in chaos. That was if Joffrey already sat the throne. He forced himself upright, ignoring Melisandre's cautioning hand. His body shuddered with weakness. He felt as though he had not moved in an eternity. Every muscle ached, every limb weighed down by fatigue, as if the grave itself still clutched at him. But he was Robert Baratheon, the first of his name, the king of the Undulls and the First Men. He had won the throne by force of arms. He had faced Rhaegar Targaryen on the trident and smashed him with his warhammer. He refused to let a little thing like death keep him from saving his oldest friend. Gritting his teeth, he tried to stand but staggered, pressing his weight against a damp wall. His breathing was ragged, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "You must not rush," Melisandre warned, stepping close to support his broad shoulders. "It took all my strength to call you back from the darkness. The link to your body is fragile." He shrugged her off, though he appreciated the support more than he would admit. "How long?" he asked through clenched teeth. "How long have I been gone?" The Red Woman lowered her gaze. "Long enough for your queen to proclaim Joffrey as your heir, and for Lord Stark to be declared a traitor. I cannot say how many days exactly in the capital's time, but it is soon. The Boy King is to make a public demonstration of his power at the Great September of Baelor, if the rumors I have heard are correct. Ned Stark's execution. Very soon." Robert's mind pulsed with urgency. There was no time to lose. He had come back for a purpose, to set the realm aright. "I need to go to King's Landing," he said, forcing the words out through a dry throat. "Ned must live." Melisandre tilted her head, her expression oddly composed. "That is why I brought you here. I saw the flames show me your face, that of a king who would rise again. The Lord of Light commanded me to restore your life so you may avert a calamity. You must help your brother Stannis and bring the true faith to these shores." The last words pricked Robert's ire. He had never been a man of faith, old gods or new. The thought of Melisandre using his resurrection as a means of spreading her religion made his temper flare. Yet he could not deny the reality. He lived, though he had died. Perhaps she was truly chosen by some power beyond his comprehension. For now, he would set aside his anger. There were more pressing matters. "Where is Stannis?" he demanded, leaning heavily against the cool stone. "Dragonstone," said Melisandre, "preparing his ships, his men. He intended to sail once he heard of your demise, but everything has changed now. If you present yourself as living, the pretensions of Joffrey and the Lannisters will be undone in an instant. But it must be done carefully, or their wrath will burn the city to the ground." Robert ground his teeth. "This is my realm," he growled, as if to reassure himself. "King's Landing belongs to me. I will return and set matters straight. This nonsense with Cersei, it ends now." Melisandre gave a slight smile, inclining her head as though satisfied with his decision. She gestured to a small table set against the cavern's wall, on which lay a cloak of dark wool and a sword. "I had these brought here. They are modest, but they will serve you. We cannot risk that you be recognized too soon. You must move in shadow until the moment is ripe." Gingerly, Robert made his way to the table, feeling Melisandre's watchful gaze upon him. Each step was an act of stubborn will. He gripped the edge of the rough wooden table, bracing himself as he reached for the cloak. A memory flickered. The last time he had worn anything so plain, it had been during the rebellion, when he had traveled incognito to gather allies. Even then, he'd been younger, full of vigor and confidence. Now he felt old, battered, uncertain. But he had been granted a second life. If that did not instill a sense of urgency in him, nothing would. He picked up the sword. The hilt felt foreign in his hand, not like his warhammer, which had been an extension of his arm. Yet the weight was reassuring. It reminded him of who he was and what he had done to claim the Seven Kingdoms. Melisandre watched him in silence. Her presence radiated warmth, as though she was a living flame. Then, in the quiet, Robert realized something. He could not do this alone. "You said you came from Stannis," he asked quietly. "Did he give you any instructions?" A faint smirk touched her lips. "He commanded that I look for the path that would bring him closer to the throne. He believes he is your rightful heir now that you are, or rather, were dead. But his notion of inheritance may shift if he learns you live. Regardless, he respects the Lord of Light's visions. If you go to him and he sees your resurrection with his own eyes, he may bend to your will." For a time, Robert gave a short, mirthless laugh. Stannis bending to anyone's will? We'll see. They shared a moment of cool silence, while the distant drip of water formed a pattern in the cavern's hush. Robert imagined Stannis's stern face, carved in stone, unyielding in the face of all obstacles. That was the man's great strength, and his great flaw. Still, Robert had no desire to see the realm torn asunder by civil war. With Renly also in the wings, hungry for power, the realm could easily fracture into 3 separate claims. He must act swiftly, gather allies, and above all, rescue Ned before the fool boy Joffrey could do something irreversible. As he fastened the cloak around his broad shoulders, he turned to Melisandre. "How do we leave this place? Where are we exactly?" "We are beneath Dragonstone," she said, "in one of the hidden passages. You were brought here in secret, by men who still remember you fondly and who believe Stannis will be the salvation of Westeros. Fear not. We have a small boat waiting to take us to the mainland under cover of night. If you can endure the journey, we may reach King's Landing in time." Robert let out a sharp breath. The prospect of traveling quietly, avoiding attention, was no small thing for a man accustomed to the pomp of royal processions. But he had no choice. "Lead on," he said, gripping the sword hilt so tightly that his knuckles went white. They began their trek through a dark passage lit only by Melisandre's small torch. The priestess led the way, her robes trailing along the dusty floor, her flame casting dancing shadows on the dripping walls. Robert followed, glancing at the winding rock formations. He felt a strange sense of displacement, as though he hovered between 2 worlds, the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. Each footstep reminded him he yet lived, that his heart still beat, that his will still guided him. Perhaps there was a god of light after all, or perhaps he had simply encountered a sorcery older and darker than men dared speak of. At length, they emerged onto a rocky shore. The sky above was black as velvet, the sea lapping at the jagged stones. A small rowboat bobbed at the water's edge. 3 figures awaited them, cloaked and hooded, their faces hidden. They bowed their heads as Melisandre approached. One of them spoke in a low voice. "Priestess, we are ready." She inclined her head. "Our king journeys with us. We must see that he arrives safely on the mainland." The 3 exchanged glances of reverent wonder. Robert, uneasy under their silent scrutiny, gestured for them to get on with it. The men pushed the boat into the water, and Melisandre steadied Robert as he climbed aboard. He hated feeling fragile, but each step was a fresh test of will. Nonetheless, he settled into the rowboat, Melisandre beside him, the others taking up the oars. They moved away from the rocky shore, the boat slicing through the calm waters under the moonless sky. The only illumination came from the torch Melisandre held and the shimmering reflection of distant starlight on the water's surface. The air was cold, and Robert's breath fogged in front of him. He pulled his cloak tighter, wrestling with his dizzying thoughts. Ned, the Lannisters, the realm. All these worries spun around him like a kaleidoscope of regret and resolve. But through that swirl came a single unwavering mission: to prevent Ned's head from rolling under a Lannister sword. When finally he spoke again, his voice was quiet, as though afraid to shatter the hush of the water. "Do you have a plan?" he asked Melisandre. "Or do we simply march into the Red Keep and proclaim me returned from the dead?" Her eyes glimmered with reflected firelight. We must be clever. If you appear too openly and too soon, the Lannisters will act to secure the throne by any means. Joffrey's first impulse will be to kill Ned Stark all the faster. Cersei's cunning is well known. She will not hesitate to destroy every possible threat. You need loyal men around you, men who will stand and declare you the true king. If we can rally enough support within the city, we might force the Gold Cloaks to switch their allegiance as they once did for your father-in-law. Then, in front of the masses, you reveal yourself to be alive. Nothing will demolish Joffrey's claim more swiftly than your living presence. Robert felt a surge of grim satisfaction. That was the way. To let the city see him, to let the small folk cry out in awe. Cersei's illusions would shatter. But the question remained. Could he gather enough loyal men without anyone suspecting his presence? He quietly stroked the hilt of his sword, as though it might give him counsel. We'll need someone inside the capital to do our bidding, someone whose loyalty remains unshakable. Melisandre shook her head slightly. I know not whom you can trust among the small council. Varys the spider weaves webs of secrets. Peter Baelish is cunning and self-serving. Pycelle is likely a Lannister pawn. Ser Barristan was ever a loyal knight, but even he may be powerless alone. The mention of Barristan Selmy gave Robert a flicker of hope. The man was honorable to a fault. If there was anyone who might risk his life to help Robert retake the throne, it might be Barristan the Bold. But had Barristan survived the chaos after Robert's death? Robert could only hope. We'll look for him, he said, or any of the Kingsguard with a shred of loyalty left. The rowboat glided silently across the water, the oars dipping in unison, and the swirling mist gave the voyage an ethereal hush. The world felt suspended. Robert found his thoughts drifting to Ned Stark, the man who had marched beside him in the rebellion, who had comforted him when they both learned of Lyanna's fate, who had tried so hard to steer Robert toward good governance. What a fool Robert had been, letting wine and hunting and the stale comforts of court life drown out the clarity of purpose he once possessed. Now the gods, if gods they were, had seen fit to give him a second chance. He breathed deep, filling his lungs with the salty air. He was alive, and he was ready to fight. At dawn, they landed on a remote stretch of coastline far from the main roads. Melisandre's attendants helped Robert from the boat, then quickly hid it among the rocks. The sun was still below the horizon, but a faint band of pale light began to lift the darkness. Robert stood with his cloak wrapped around him, gazing at the land that he had once called his own to rule. Every hill, every distant tree, every stony outcrop belonged to the realm he had won. But now, returning in secrecy, he felt like an exile. One of the men led the way up a narrow path, guiding them to a modest cottage hidden by a small copse of trees. There, Robert and Melisandre took a brief respite, warming themselves with a fire and a meal of salted fish and stale bread. Robert tore the bread with trembling hands, feeling his strength gradually return as he ate. He did not speak much, lost in his own reflection. Melisandre, for her part, simply watched him. When the sun was fully risen, they resumed their journey on foot. The three cloaked men accompanied them, acting as guards or perhaps as guides, though none dared to address Robert directly unless he spoke first. Each time Robert stumbled, he would curse and grit his teeth, refusing to let weakness overtake him. He felt the dull ache in his abdomen where the boar had gored him. He wondered, with grim amusement, if the beast's tusks had left scars that Melisandre's magic could not completely erase. They traveled all day, staying off main roads, moving through lonely fields and sparsely wooded trails, until at last they approached a small roadside inn. The men insisted Robert remain out of sight behind a clump of trees, while Melisandre went inside to secure lodging. A short while later, she emerged and gestured for Robert to join her. In a cramped, shabby room on the second floor, they convened. The men took posts in the hallway, ensuring privacy. Melisandre closed the door, turning to Robert. Tomorrow we hire a wagon. We will claim you are my injured brother, returning from war. We must keep your face hidden. We aim to slip inside King's Landing among the throngs of travelers coming to witness the spectacle of Lord Stark's fate. Robert felt a surge of cold rage. The city was preparing for Ned's public humiliation and execution, as if it were mere entertainment. He clenched his fists. "We'll stop it," he growled. "Let them line the streets to see Ned's head. Instead, they will see me." Melisandre's red lips parted in what could have been the ghost of a smile. "That is what I have foreseen," she said. "Though visions are never certain, they shift like shadows in the fire." That night, Robert barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he envisioned the great September of Baelor, a massive crowd, Joffrey perched on that dais, too young and too cruel to wield such power, and Ned Stark kneeling, the sword of the executioner raised high. Robert would wake in a sweat, panting, the ghostly memory of the boar's fangs still in his gut. He swore that if some twisted fate kept him from reaching Ned in time, he would kill every Lannister in Westeros with his bare hands. The next day they hired a rickety wagon from the innkeeper, paying in coins minted with Robert's own likeness. The irony was not lost on him. He lurked in the back, disguised in a hood and a tattered blanket, feigning illness, while Melisandre rode up front with one of her attendants. The other two guards walked alongside, ensuring no one pried too closely. The road leading to King's Landing was busy enough with peddlers, travelers, and curious folk eager to witness the rumored downfall of Ned Stark. Conversations drifted around them, scraps of rumor swirling like flies. Some said the hand of the king had betrayed the realm. Others insisted he was a fool to challenge the new King Joffrey. Still others whispered that the Lannisters had orchestrated everything. Robert seethed, biting his tongue, resisting the urge to throw back the hood and declare himself to these ignorant gossips. The closer they got to the city, the more Robert's heart pounded. Even the sight of the towering walls in the distance filled him with a strange mixture of pride and fury. This was the seat of his power, the place he had fought and bled for. Yet it had become a viper's nest, infested with Lannister cunning. He vowed that soon, very soon, he would cleanse it. They entered the city through the mud gate. The guards gave their wagon only a cursory glance, more preoccupied with the throng of people pushing through the gates. The stench of the capital assaulted Robert's senses. Rotting fish from the docks, the stink of refuse, the sweat of bodies packed together in filthy streets. But beneath the grimy surface, Robert felt that old familiarity, the chaotic liveliness that had once made King's Landing the jewel of his realm. Melisandre guided the wagon down narrow back alleys, avoiding main thoroughfares. At last they came to an inconspicuous stable yard, where they left the wagon with a stablemaster Melisandre apparently had bribed. Robert disembarked slowly, dizzy from the jostling journey. The Red Woman spoke to him in a low tone. "We must find a secure place where you can rest, gather a handful of allies. Stannis told me of a loyal man near the Street of Flower who might shelter us. A merchant with ties to Dragonstone. It's not a certain thing, but he may help." "Very well," Robert said, leaning on the sword that clacked at his hip. "But we move quickly. We don't have time to skulk and hide for long. When is the execution supposed to take place?" "I've heard it's set for tomorrow at midday," Melisandre answered, her face grave. "We have little time." Robert felt his stomach clench. So soon. If they did not act carefully yet swiftly, they would be too late. And all of this, his resurrection, his journey, the danger, would be for nothing. A bead of sweat trickled down his brow. "Let's move," he said hoarsely. With the two guards flanking them, they made their way through twisting streets. The city seemed oblivious, teeming with hawkers selling their wares, children running barefoot, dogs sniffing at garbage heaps. Now and then, Robert glimpsed the red-cloaked shapes of Lannister guards or the gleam of gold from the city watch. He kept his head low, cursing the dull throb in his limbs that hindered his speed. But adrenaline fueled him. He clutched at the small hope that they would succeed. Eventually, they arrived at an unassuming bakery, its shutters closed despite the hour. Melisandre rapped on the door in a distinctive pattern. After a tense silence, the door cracked open, and a man in a flour-dusted apron peered out, eyes narrowing at the sight of the Red Woman and the cloaked, hulking figure beside her. She whispered something, and his eyes widened. He immediately unlatched the door and ushered them in. Inside, the bakery was dark, the hearth cold. The man lit a small lamp, which flickered uncertainly, illuminating shelves of bread and pastries gone stale. "So it is true?" the man asked in a hushed voice. "The king, the real king, he lives?" Robert pushed his hood back, revealing his bearded face. The man startled, stumbling backward, nearly toppling a row of bread loaves in the process. "Seven save us," he whispered. But I heard you were dead, your grace, ripped apart by a boar." "So I was," Robert said flatly. "And now I'm not." The baker's face trembled with awe and fear in equal measure. He knelt, flour dust drifting from his clothes to the floor. "Your grace, anything you need, my house, my life, I offer them to you." Melisandre placed a hand lightly on the man's shoulder. "We need a safe place to rest and to plan. By tomorrow at midday, we must be ready to move." The baker nodded quickly. "I have a cellar. No one will find you there." He led them to a hidden door behind a stack of flour sacks. Beyond it, a narrow stair descended to a cramped but dry space, lit by a single lantern. It smelled faintly of yeast and damp stone. Robert and Melisandre went down, the two guards remaining above to keep watch. For a long moment, Robert simply took in the surroundings. The cellar was far from comfortable. A few wooden crates, a rough table, a scattering of old sacks. But for a man returned from the grave, it was sanctuary enough. As Melisandre carefully sat on a crate, Robert paced despite his fatigue. "We need men," he said. "If I'm to show myself tomorrow, I won't have the strength alone to fight off every Lannister guard. We need allies. How do we rally them in the time we have?" The Red Woman studied him. "Stannis expected to bring his forces here, but we cannot summon them so swiftly. Perhaps your presence will inspire the Gold Cloaks to remember their oath to the crown. Perhaps the small folk, upon seeing you alive, will rise in your defense. Fear and shock can shift allegiances quickly." Robert ran a hand through his thick hair. He disliked counting on maybes and perhaps. But time was short. "We also have Ser Barristan," he muttered. "If he's still on the Kingsguard, he might be at the September tomorrow." "That could be our moment," Melisandre agreed. "Stannis said that Barristan was disfavored by the Lannisters for letting you be wounded, but he may still be on duty until they replace him. He's a man of honor, and once he sees you—" Robert nodded sharply. That was the best hope. He turned to the Red Woman, frowning. "If we fail or if we're discovered too soon." Her gaze was steady, a faint spark dancing in her red irises. "There is no turning back, your grace." He felt a chill run down his spine. She had conjured him from death. He was not entirely sure he had any choice in the matter. Perhaps the only way forward was the Lord of Light's chosen path. He did not relish being a puppet of fate, but to save Ned, to save the realm, he would endure this. He exhaled, leaning against the cellar wall. "We wait until tomorrow then," he said. "I'll rest, gather my strength. Tomorrow, at the Great September, we make our move." That night was long and restless. Robert lay on a pallet of straw in one corner, Melisandre dozing lightly against a crate. Now and then, Robert drifted off, only to jolt awake with images of heads on spikes and crowds screaming for blood. Memories and nightmares melded. The sound of the boar, the memory of its tusks shredding his flesh, the red of his own blood mixing with wine. Then, always, the darkness and the distant voice calling him back, a voice that made his heart pound in terror and strange longing. Dawn came too soon. The baker descended the stairs with a simple meal, bread, cheese, and ale. Robert devoured it, ignoring the sourness in his stomach. He found a renewed sense of vigor in the knowledge that today he would finally act. Melisandre wrapped herself in a deep cloak, her face half hidden, and Robert followed suit. The guards would stay behind, ready to spread the word among the small folk if Robert showed himself in the September. The city was already astir. Throngs of curious onlookers flocked toward the Great September of Baelor, hoping for a glimpse of the king's justice. The Red Woman and Robert walked among them, just another pair of travelers, though Robert's massive frame and regal bearing drew more than a few sidelong glances. They reached the plaza before the massive marble edifice. White steps climbed toward towering doors flanked by the statues of the Seven. Gold cloaks stood in formation, and near the center of the broad avenue, a tall, ornate platform had been erected. Robert saw the swords and pikes of the city watch glinting in the morning light. The crowd was thick, pressing in on all sides, buzzing with morbid anticipation. Robert felt his heart in his throat. He stood near the back of the crowd, watching. Any moment now, Ned would appear, hands bound, head bowed, to be paraded before the howling mass. On the dais would be Joffrey, that whelp, with his mother and probably the rest of the twisted brood. Robert's teeth ground so hard he feared they would crack. He could feel the tension in Melisandre as well, though she seemed eerily calm. Suddenly, horns sounded. The doors of the September opened, and out stepped Joffrey Baratheon, clad in a crimson tunic and a golden crown. Cersei and the Kingsguard flanked him, along with the stoic figure of Lord Varys and the slippery Peter Baelish. Robert's rage burned. That was his seat, his throne, his right as the man who had overthrown the Targaryens. Now a false heir flaunted it. Behind Joffrey came 2 Lannister guards dragging Ned Stark forward. Robert's heart seized at the sight. Ned looked pale, worn, but his eyes still held that quiet dignity. His hair was unkempt, his beard grown out during his imprisonment. His leg was bandaged from a wound he'd sustained trying to defend himself at the Red Keep. The crowd jeered and hurled insults. Some spat at him. Others looked on in pity. Ned was forced to kneel before Joffrey. The boy king smirked, letting his eyes rake over the crowd. Silence gradually fell. Robert stood, trembling with anticipation. Not yet, he told himself. He had to wait for the perfect moment, a time when the crowd's eyes would be on Joffrey and Ned, so that Robert's appearance would be a lightning strike that no one could deny. Joffrey spoke in a shrill voice that carried over the plaza. Lord Eddard Stark stood against my claim to the throne. He sought to deny me my birthright, accusing my beloved mother of treason. Now, before the eyes of gods and men, Lord Stark will confess his crimes and plead for mercy. If he does so, I, Joffrey of the houses Baratheon and Lannister, may show him the clemency he does not deserve. Robert could barely contain a growl. That wretched boy, so ignorant of the true ways of the world, untested, untried, a puppet of Cersei's manipulations. Ned raised his head, scanning the crowd. The watchers murmured. Many believed Ned to be an honorable man. Would he kneel to save his daughters, rumored to be held by the Lannisters? In a calm, steady voice, Ned addressed them. I come before you as a humble servant of the realm. I wish no harm upon the king, nor do I seek to unravel the peace of the 7 kingdoms. All I did for the sake of truth. Cersei stiffened, golden hair glinting in the sun. She gave Ned a hard look, as if urging him to speak carefully. Joffrey leaned forward, eyes glittering with malice. Confess, he demanded. Say that you betrayed me, that you sought to steal my crown. A hush fell. Ned bowed his head, and Robert felt his anger churn. He knew Ned would do anything to protect his daughters. That included lying or degrading himself for the sake of mercy. Ned's voice, when it came, was heavy with resignation. I confess, he said, eyes flicking up to meet the crowd. I confess to treason against the rightful king, Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name. Gasps rippled through the throng. Some men looked relieved, others outraged. Cersei's lips twitched in a satisfied smirk. Joffrey's grin grew cruel. And what do you beg of the king? Ned's jaw set. He forced the words out, each syllable like a shard of glass. I beg the king's mercy, for myself and for my daughters. Joffrey turned his gaze upon the crowd. Robert's pulse thundered. The moment was coming. He could feel it. Melisandre's presence at his side was electric. If they missed this chance, Ned would be lost. Joffrey tapped a finger on the arm of the wooden throne placed atop the dais. My mother wishes me to spare the traitor. Ser Barristan counsels mercy. but they have the hearts of women. I am king." He stood, and the crowd tensed. "And a king must be bold. Ser Island, bring me his head." Chaos erupted. Cersei whirled, horror on her face, hissing protests at Joffrey. Barristan Selmy stepped forward, concern etched into every line of his face. Sansa Stark wailed somewhere off to the side, struggling against guards. The crowd roared, some cheering for blood, others groaning in dismay. Robert saw the massive shape of the headsman stride forward with a greatsword. Ned Stark closed his eyes in a moment of acceptance. Now, Robert lunged forward, throwing off his cloak, ignoring Melisandre's hissed plea for caution. He thrust past gawking bystanders, roaring in a voice that shook with righteous fury, "Stop!" His sound carried across the plaza like rolling thunder. Heads snapped around in disbelief at the sight of a huge, bearded man in plain clothes. A hush fell, as if the entire city gasped at once. He pushed to the front, men and women parting in astonishment. There, on the dais, Joffrey's eyes went wide. Cersei's face paled, as though she had glimpsed a ghost. Even Ser Barristan stumbled back a half step, recognition flaring in his eyes. Ned Stark looked up, confusion and shock warring in his expression. Robert's chest heaved with the exertion of pushing through the throng, but his voice was firm, every syllable steeped in the authority of a king. "Any man who lays a sword upon Eddard Stark answers to me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people screamed, others fell to their knees. The city watch shifted, spears wavering. Cersei took a trembling step forward, face contorted. "Robert, you're dead. This is some trick." But her words died on her lips as Robert strode toward the platform. He grabbed the hilt of his sword and leveled it at Ser Island Payne. The headsman paused, uncertain, glancing between Joffrey and the returning king. Joffrey's face was a mask of disbelief and horror. "It can't be," Joffrey stammered. You were killed." Robert locked eyes with the boy, voice simmering with cold fury. "That's a lie. The boar wounded me, but I survived. My whore of a queen dared to keep me from my rightful throne, daring to crown her bastard." He spat the word, letting the crowd digest it. "Bastard." A hush followed, a scandalized intake of breath. Cersei, her face twisting, tried to speak, but Robert cut her off with a thunderous bellow that resonated off the marble walls. "You dare to call yourself a Baratheon?" he roared at Joffrey. "Where is your black hair? Where is the stag's lineage? You're no son of mine." Pandemonium ensued. The crowd screamed, half in shock, half in wild excitement. Gold cloaks began milling about, some raising their weapons as though preparing to fight, others uncertain whom to obey. Robert turned to them, his expression fierce. "I am your king, the man who led you to victory against the Targaryens. You swore oaths to me, oaths to House Baratheon. Will you stand with the true king or with a whelp who cannot prove his own parentage?" The watchers exchanged bewildered looks. Some recognized Robert's face and broad frame, others doubted. But the seeds of confusion and rebellion had been planted. Cersei whirled on the gold cloaks, fury twisting her features. "Kill this impostor," she screeched. "He's a mummer's farce." Ser Barristan Selmy intervened, stepping between the guards and Robert. "Hold!" His voice rang with the command of a seasoned knight. He stared at Robert, eyes bright with a glimmer of hope. "Your Grace? Is this truly you?" Robert met his gaze. "Barristan, by the gods, it's me. This is no trick. I was wounded near to death, but I am returned, and I will have no harm done to Eddard Stark." The grizzled knight's hand trembled on the hilt of his sword. Slowly he sank to one knee. "Your Grace," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I serve at your pleasure." At that, half the gold cloaks looked ready to kneel as well, awed by the living legend before them. But Cersei would not surrender so easily. She spun to Joffrey, grabbing his arm. "He's lying," she shrieked to the crowd. "Robert is dead and buried. This is a shadow wearing his face." Robert glared up at her, the anger in him so hot it nearly burned away his reason. "The only shadows here are your treasons, Cersei. You would let our friend Ned Stark die to secure your bastard on my throne." Joffrey, looking frantic, turned to the guards. "I am the king," he cried, voice cracking. "Obey me. Kill them." A knot of Lannister men on the dais raised crossbows, aiming at Robert. For an instant, Robert felt the chill of mortality. If they loosed bolts, he might be cut down. But then, from within the crowd, a bright flash of red appeared. Melisandre, her cloak thrown back, the ruby at her throat blazing with an otherworldly glow. She raised her hands, chanting words that hissed with power. The Lannister men faltered, their aim wavering as though something unseen gripped their minds. Some shrank back in terror. Others stood transfixed. In that moment of hesitation, Barristan Selmy and a handful of gold cloaks loyal to Robert charged the dais. The watchers parted in an uproar. Robert himself lunged forward, sword at the ready, ignoring the agony in his abdomen. He locked eyes with Joffrey, who cowered behind his mother. The memory of their shared time in the Red Keep, Robert's dismissive attitude toward the boy, Cersei's manipulations, flashed through his mind, fueling his rage. Guards loyal to the Lannisters closed ranks, forming a wall of steel. Barristan clashed with them, blade ringing out, while behind him, the uncertain gold cloaks were turning on one another, some rallying to Robert, others obeying Cersei. The crowd erupted in panic, surging back to avoid the melee. Ned Stark still knelt, manacled, no weapon in hand. A Lannister guard tried to drag him away from the dais, but suddenly Arya Stark darted from the crowd. How she had slipped past the chaos, no one knew, and she threw herself at the guard, screaming for her father. It was madness, swirling chaos on marble steps. Robert slammed against a Lannister guard, their swords crossing. The man recognized the broad-shouldered figure, hesitated an instant, and Robert took advantage of that opening, knocking him aside. Another guard lunged in from the side, and Robert felt the sting of steel slice across his forearm. He roared, barreling forward, smashing the pommel of his sword into the guard's face. Blood spattered across the white marble. Cersei shrieked curses, trying to rally the men to Joffrey's side. But the illusions she had spun for years were unraveling. The seeds of doubt had been sown too publicly. Some guards simply lowered their weapons, unwilling to face the wrath of the resurrected king. Barristan used the flat of his blade to strike away the man grappling Ned Stark, freeing him. The old knight pulled Ned to his feet, though Ned could barely stand. Arya clung to her father, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. Barristan pivoted, facing Robert. "We must get Lord Stark out of here," he shouted over the din. Robert nodded grimly. "Take him and go." He glared at Joffrey, who stood trembling, crossbows still raised around him. "I've a score to settle." But at that moment, a crossbow bolt whistled through the air, embedding itself in the wood near Robert's shoulder. Cersei had taken one of the crossbows from her men, and her face was contorted with hatred. She fumbled to reload, but her hands were shaking. "Stay back," she shrieked. "Stay away from Joffrey, you monster." Robert gripped his sword, advancing on them. Another guard tried to interpose, but Robert slashed downward, forcing the man to yield. The blade's edge kissed the guard's breastplate, leaving a deep groove. The guard stumbled back, falling. Robert towered over Joffrey, who cowered, eyes wide and wild. "You are no son of mine," Robert growled. "You will never sit my throne." Joffrey whimpered, looking to Cersei for help, but she was struggling with the crossbow's mechanism. Robert's gaze flicked to her, and he recalled the years of misery, the lies, the frustration, the betrayal. He ached to end her right then and there, but part of him remembered once loving her beauty, if not truly loving her. Hesitation wavered in him. That heartbeat of hesitation was enough for a crossbow bolt to whistle by, nicking Robert's ear. Behind him, one of the Lannister guards had decided to risk his shot. Pain flared through Robert's head, and he cursed, swinging around. The chaos was total, with pockets of fighting swirling across the plaza, but the majority of the crowd fled, screaming. Ser Barristan was already leading Ned Stark and Arya away, hacking down any who tried to stop them. Robert saw Ned glance back, a look of disbelief and gratitude in his eyes. Robert gave him a terse nod. They would speak later if they both survived this. Meanwhile, Melisandre, from somewhere in the throng, continued her strange chant. Flames flickered around her ruby, mesmerizing friend and foe alike. Lannister men broke under the uncanny pressure, throwing down their arms or fleeing. Robert sensed the tide turning in his favor. The City Watch, those not loyal to the Lannisters, began to realize that Robert truly lived and that they might be fighting the rightful king. The ring of steel clattered as more and more men dropped their weapons. Cersei realized the shift in the wind. Rage filled her, but she was nothing if not cunning. She seized Joffrey's arm and tried to retreat, but Robert blocked their path. He reached out and grabbed Joffrey by the collar, hauling him close. The boy shrieked. Cersei raised the crossbow, but Robert wrenched it from her hands with a snarl, tossing it aside. "It ends now," Robert growled. "Call off your dogs. Give up this farce. I might grant you a quick death." Cersei hissed like a cornered cat, clutching Joffrey protectively. "You are the farce," she spat. "A drunken fool. You think this rabble will follow you after you crawled from the grave, reeking of black magic?" Robert's lip curled. Better a drunken fool than a liar who spat on the crown. He turned to the gold-cloaked men who stood uncertainly near the dais. "Seize them," he commanded, pointing his sword at Cersei and Joffrey. "They have betrayed the throne. Let them be taken into custody." For a moment, no one moved. The tension was thick as an iron wall. Then, one by one, the gold cloaks lowered their weapons and strode toward Cersei. She flailed, screaming, "I am the queen! I am the queen!" But they tore Joffrey from her arms, clasping him in irons. The boys' wails cut through the clamor. Cersei fought like a wild thing, nails clawing at their faces, but she, too, was overpowered. Robert stood there, panting, the sword heavy in his hand, fresh blood trickling down his ear. The entire plaza was a chaos of bodies, but the fighting had all but ceased. The Lannister guards, outnumbered and confused, threw down their arms. Scattered survivors knelt. The hush that followed crackled with shock. Had they truly witnessed the dead king return? The City Watch seemed to believe it. The small folk seemed half terrified, half ecstatic. They whispered among themselves, "King Robert returned from the grave, the rightful king." A litany of awe and fear. Melisandre approached, her expression serene, though perspiration gleamed on her brow. "It is done, your grace," she murmured, as if reading the question in his eyes. Robert looked around, mind racing. Ned Stark and Arya were gone, presumably spirited to safety by Ser Barristan. Good. A weight lifted from him. Then his gaze fell on Joffrey, sullen and trembling, locked in irons. Robert felt an odd pang. The boy had called him father for years. Now Robert wanted to see him pay for the betrayal. But perhaps there would be time for justice later. He noticed a fresh hush in the crowd as an older woman's voice rose in the distance, chanting, "Long live the king." Others took it up, at first uncertain, then louder. "Long live the king." The cry rippled outward, filling the plaza. Robert tasted blood on his lip. He straightened, shoulders squared, battered body aching. But he was alive, a resurrected king. And for better or worse, the city was his once more. "Take them to the dungeons," he commanded, indicating Cersei and Joffrey. "They will answer for their treasons. Let it be known that I, Robert of House Baratheon, live. Let the realm hear that the rightful king has returned to set things right." The men obeyed, leading the captives away. Robert did not spare them another look. Instead, he nodded to the gold cloaks who stood watch, then turned to Melisandre. "I need to see Ned, and I need to gather the small council. This isn't over. There will be chaos in the wake of this revelation. Tywin Lannister will not let this stand." Melisandre's crimson eyes sparked. "We will handle it, your grace. The Lord of Light has chosen you for this moment." Robert exhaled, forcing himself to remain steady. The throng still watched, half in fear, half in reverence. He raised his bloodied sword, letting them see it gleam in the sunlight. With a booming voice, he declared, "I am Robert Baratheon. I have returned to claim what is mine. Let any who would deny me stand forth, and they shall feel my wrath." The plaza erupted in cheers and shouts. Some cried out in fear, others jubilation. Guards and small folk alike were swayed by the spectacle of a legend reborn. In that maelstrom of emotion, Robert felt a curious sense of peace settle over him. He had done it. He had saved Ned Stark from certain death. Now a greater struggle lay ahead, restoring order, dealing with the Lannisters, reconciling with Stannis, perhaps even facing Renly's ambitions. But he was alive, and no boar's tusks, no Lannister treachery, no illusions of a false prince would keep him from fulfilling the duty he had once neglected. The king had returned, and the Seven Kingdoms would tremble under his hand. They found Ned Stark soon after. Hidden away in the winding corridors of the Great September, Ser Barristan had barricaded him in a side chamber, where Arya clung to her father, refusing to let go. When Robert entered, Ned's gray eyes lifted. For a moment, neither man spoke. The silence between them was thick with memories of 1,000 battles and shared regrets. Finally, Ned rose, ignoring his own pain, and inclined his head in a gesture of respect. "Your Grace," he said softly. I thought you were gone." Robert sheathed his sword with a tired laugh. "So did I, Ned." He reached out and clasped Ned's shoulder. "But here I stand, with many thanks to the Red Woman's sorcery. I'm sorry I didn't act sooner. I should never have let them take you." Ned's expression was grave, but a shadow of relief passed across his features. "We have both been fools," he murmured. "But I'm alive and my daughter is safe. That is enough for now." Robert nodded. He glanced at Arya, who stared at him with wide, wary eyes. He tried to manage a smile. "You're a brave one, Arya." She ducked her head, still trembling, but she held Ned's hand in a grip of iron. Ser Barristan stepped forward, wiping blood from his gauntlet. "Your Grace, the City Watch is disposing of the bodies and capturing the remaining Lannister men. The people are in an uproar, but they'll quiet once they see you sitting the throne. What would you have us do next?" Robert was silent a moment. Then he said, "We gather the small council, what remains of it, and restore order. Tywin Lannister will come, but we'll be ready. I want men loyal to me controlling the gates. I want ravens sent to every corner of the realm. The king lives, and all loyal subjects must reaffirm their oaths of fealty. Tell them the truth of Joffrey's parentage. We keep Cersei and Joffrey in the dungeons until they can be tried for their crimes." He paused, looking at Ned. "Will you stand by me as hand, old friend? Will you help me fix the kingdom that I let fall to ruin?" Ned swallowed. He glanced at Arya, then back to Robert. "Yes," he said softly, "for the good of the realm, and for our families." Relief and a tinge of sadness mingled in Robert's chest. "Good," he said. "We have a chance to make this right, to mend the wounds and keep the wolves at bay. I won't fail this time." A faint smile touched Ned's lips. "Then let's begin." Robert signaled to Barristan, who led them out of the side chamber. Outside, the Great September was littered with signs of the battle. Broken weapons, wounded men groaning, frightened onlookers huddling behind pillars. But all eyes turned to Robert as he emerged, flanked by Ned Stark and Ser Barristan. The watchers inclined their heads, uncertain, yet compelled by the raw presence of the man who had once been their king, and was again. As Robert walked, Melisandre appeared by his side, her red hair glowing like a coal in the half-light. She gave him a measured smile, bowing her head in deference. "You see now the power of R'hllor," she whispered. "You have been chosen, Robert Baratheon. Do not forget who returned you to this life." He nodded curtly, unsure how to respond. Part of him resented being beholden to any god, but he could not deny the truth. He was here, flesh and blood, because of her. For better or worse, he owed her a debt he might never fully repay. They stepped outside, into the daylight. People thronged the streets, drawn by the uproar, uncertain of the future. The hush that fell as Robert walked among them was almost tangible. The city had expected a blood-stained spectacle of Ned Stark's death. Instead, it received a miracle and a new reign. Robert, keenly aware of his battered body, forced himself to stand tall, letting the people see their resurrected king. His voice rolled through the street, carried by adrenaline and the weight of destiny. Good people of King's Landing, the false king has been deposed. I, Robert Baratheon, have returned to set right the wrongs done in my absence. There shall be no more kingslaying, no more treason in the shadows. Go to your homes in peace, and know that your king stands among you once more. A ragged cheer went up, some shouting Baratheon, others weeping in shock. Word would spread through the city like wildfire, and soon the realm beyond would tremble with the news. Robert turned to Ned, placing a hand gently on his friend's shoulder. Rest, Ned. Tend to your wounds. Then we'll see to the next steps. There is much to do. Ned merely nodded, glancing around for signs of Sansa, who might still be in Lannister clutches. Robert vowed to help reunite Ned's family, to correct every injustice that had flourished in his absence. Then, steeling himself, Robert led the way back to the Red Keep, determined to reclaim his seat of power. The walk to the castle was surreal. People flocked behind him at a respectful distance, uncertain whether to treat him as a holy revenant or a fearsome warlord. Robert bled from his ear and arm, ignoring the pain. The swelling of a bruise on his side reminded him that death had been close indeed. But the surge of purpose in his veins pushed him onward. He had left the realm to rot while he drank and hunted. Now he would use his second chance to rule as he should have all along. Upon arriving at the Red Keep, the guards parted, stunned and bewildered. Some fell to their knees, others simply stared. Robert strode into the throne room, battered boots echoing on the polished floor. There it was, the Iron Throne, forged of 1,000 swords. The seat he had occupied for years, though he had despised its prickly, uncomfortable shape. Now, it seemed like a new symbol, a second chance at leadership. He mounted the steps, turning to face the assembled guard, the onlookers, the remnants of the court. Melisandre lingered near a pillar, inscrutable. Ned stood below, supporting himself on Barristan's arm. Peter Baelish was nowhere to be seen. Likely he had slithered away at the first sign of trouble. Varys lurked in the shadows, face pale and watchful. Grand Maester Pycelle trembled behind a line of worried-looking servants. Slowly, Robert lowered himself onto the Iron Throne, feeling the sharp metal press against his back. The pain reminded him he was alive. He inhaled, letting the hush settle over the hall. "Bring forth the small council," he said, voice echoing. "We have work to do. First, we secure the realm. Then we see justice done. Let it be known that any who declare for House Baratheon will be pardoned for past missteps. But any who continue to plot against me, or move to free the false prince and his mother, will face the king's justice." The watchers exchanged anxious glances. Some, like Varys, bowed their heads, understanding the gravity of the moment. Robert realized that half the men in this hall had probably put gold on Joffrey's name. But that was before they saw Robert stride into the plaza. Living flesh returned from the dead. The fear in their eyes was palpable. In that fear, Robert found power. "Ser Barristan," Robert said, eyeing the knight's blood-smeared armor. "You are reinstated as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. You served me faithfully for years, and I will not forget it." Barristan lowered his head. "Thank you, Your Grace. I will endeavor to serve with honor." Robert gestured to Ned. "Lord Stark will be my hand, if he is willing." Ned opened his mouth to speak, but Robert continued, his voice firm. "No man in the 7 kingdoms do I trust more. He proved his loyalty even when it cost him his freedom. Rise, Lord Eddard Stark, Hand of the King." Ned hesitated, then sank to a knee and bowed his head. "I accept your grace. May I prove worthy of your faith." A faint smile touched Robert's lips. "We must make peace with the rest of the realm. I doubt Tywin Lannister will bend the knee easily. We may need to prepare for war." Varys stepped forward, wringing his hands. "Your Grace, it might be prudent to send envoys. Lord Tywin would not want to see House Lannister entirely undone. Perhaps a settlement can be reached." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Lord Tywin ordered the Targaryen children slain years ago, if memory serves, to gain my favor. He is not a man who quails at bloodshed. I will not show him mercy if he raises arms against me now." Varys bowed. "Of course, your Grace. But consider that conflict means much suffering for the small folk." Robert gave a grim nod. "The small folk have suffered enough. If Tywin Lannister wishes to yield and hand over the men responsible for this treason, I will hear him out. Otherwise, war it is." He looked across the hall, noticing the throng of onlookers. Gossip would carry every word he said to the far corners of Westeros. Fine, let them speak. Let the realm know that Robert Baratheon was no longer a complacent drunk. He was a king who would act. Finally, he signaled to Melisandre. She stepped forward, inclining her head. Robert could sense the tension in the chamber at her presence. She was an exotic figure, rumored to practice dark arts. But no one could deny her power now. "Priestess," he said, meeting her eyes, "you have done me a service. As king, I repay my debts. Ask what you will." Her lips curved in a mysterious smile. "Your Grace, all I ask is that you do not forget the Lord of Light who brought you back, that you keep your heart and mind open to the truth of his fire." Robert felt a stir of discomfort, but he nodded. "I won't forget," he said carefully, leaving the future open. With that, he turned his attention back to the matters at hand. He commanded Pycelle to send for healers for the wounded, and to ensure Ned's injuries were seen to. He ordered the castle gates closed until the situation stabilized. Servants scurried to do his bidding, clearly overawed by the king's presence. Men who had once mocked Robert's drunken sloth now feared his righteous fury. Robert felt both satisfaction and a bitter twinge of regret. If he had ruled this decisively from the start, the kingdom might never have fallen into chaos. Hours later, when the immediate crisis was contained, Robert sat alone in the king's solar with Ned at his side. A physician dressed their wounds by the light of candles. Outside, the city still buzzed with rumors of the day's events. The Red Keep was under heavy guard. Cersei and Joffrey languished in the dungeons, though Robert had ordered they be treated with basic respect until a formal trial could be arranged. Sansa Stark, found trembling in her chambers, was reunited with Ned and Arya. The small council, what remained of it, was in disarray, and Robert would need to appoint new members soon. But for now, he had a moment of quiet with his friend. "You did it," Ned said, wincing as the physician wrapped his bandaged leg. "You saved me." Robert exhaled slowly. "It was never a question," he answered. "How could I let them butcher my friend? I've made enough mistakes." Ned's gaze was heavy. "There will be a price for returning from the dead, Robert. The realm believes in the Seven, not the Lord of Light." Robert gave a curt nod. "I've never cared for priests or gods, but I'll not deny what happened. There was magic at work." His voice softened. I hope this is a chance to do better. For my people, for the realm." Ned looked at him, eyes full of an emotion Robert could not name. Compassion, perhaps, or forgiveness. "Then let us seize this chance," Ned said. "You have a second life, and I am at your side." Robert clasped Ned's forearm, a bond renewed. Outside, the Red Woman's presence seemed to flicker like a candle in a dark window, reminding Robert that all was not yet resolved. Stannis would have to be addressed. Renly, too, might press a claim. But in this moment, Robert felt the weight of the Iron Throne settle upon his shoulders anew, and this time he was determined not to falter beneath it. He would rebuild the alliances he had squandered, set the laws of the realm with a firm hand, and guard his friends from the vipers in the shadows. He would not squander this second chance. The path ahead promised blood and strife. Tywin Lannister was not a man to accept defeat lightly, and the other great lords would surely maneuver for advantage in the new order. Yet Robert felt alive in a way he had not in years. He was done living passively, drowning in wine while the kingdom decayed. When the physician finished his ministrations, Robert rose and limped to the window. The city sprawled below, torches blinking in the twilight. Far beyond the rooftops, the painted table of Dragonstone loomed in his imagination, where Stannis plotted. Robert would summon his brother. They would face each other, talk, perhaps argue. But Robert was king, and Stannis would have to accept that. In the weeks to come, ravens would fly to every corner of Westeros, bearing the news. Robert Baratheon was alive. The traitors would be rooted out. The question of succession would be thrown into turmoil. Yet, amid the uncertainty, one thing was plain. Ned Stark would keep his head, and the false reign of Joffrey Baratheon would collapse like a hollow statue. The rightful king had returned from death, and the realm would feel his presence like a hammer blow. As Robert gazed upon the flickering lights of the city, he thought again of the boar's tusks, the ripping pain, and the black void of death. A memory of that endless darkness clung to him, a reminder that every day of life now was a gift snatched from the abyss. He closed his eyes and breathed in the night air. Tomorrow the real work would begin. He could almost hear the gods, or Lawler, or whichever force truly governed men's fate, whispering in his ear, "Rise, King Robert Baratheon. You have been granted life anew. Use it well." And he would. By the hammer of his will, he would. Nightfall settled over King's Landing like a weary sigh. The day had been filled with tumult and wonder. The return of Robert Baratheon from near-certain death, the foiled execution of Ned Stark on the steps of the Great September of Baelor, and the public seizure of Queen Cersei and her son Joffrey for high treason. Word spread through the city with the speed of flames catching dry brush, igniting curiosity, awe, and fear. Soldiers on the battlements still whispered wild-eyed stories of how King Robert had descended upon the dais like a vengeful ghost. In taverns and alleyways, small folk swapped rumors of magic and sorcery performed by the red-robed woman always at the king's side. Amid the lingering smoke of torches and the hush of a populace grappling with its new reality, King Robert Baratheon reclined in the royal solar of the Red Keep. He had stripped off his battered cloak, revealing a bruised torso, still healing from the boar's goring and from the vicious fight at the September hours earlier. The boar's tusks and the echoes of death still haunted his thoughts. But now, reawakened to purpose, he endured the aches as the price of a second chance. Before him, Ned Stark sat with one leg propped on a stool, the wrappings on his knee dotted with fresh blood. A hush lingered between them while the crackle of a hearth fire formed a quiet undercurrent. Outside, the skies were dark, but the city stirred with the remnants of that day's astonishing revelations. Robert let out a slow, strained exhale. "You look like hell, Ned," he said softly, a ghost of a smirk tugging at his lips. Ned's face, lined with fatigue and relief in equal measure, almost managed a hint of mirth. "I must look better than you, then." A small laugh rumbled from Robert's chest. He pressed one hand gingerly to his bandaged side. "We've both looked better. Seems we're a pair of ragged fools who've stared death in the face." Ned nodded, letting his gaze drift around the chamber. Tall windows overlooked the moonlit city. Across a broad table lay scattered reports from newly assigned watchers at the city gates and from the gold cloaks who now answered, cautiously but largely, to Robert Baratheon once again. Barristan Selmy stepped into the solar with a courteous bow. "Your Grace, Lord Stark, the dungeons have been secured. The boy king, Joffrey, and his mother, Queen Cersei, are well under guard." The knight paused, glancing between the two old friends. "No one has seen Prince Tommen or Princess Myrcella. Our best guess is that they remain in their chambers, guarded by a handful of Lannister loyalists." Robert felt a twinge of conflict. Tommen and Myrcella were children, possibly also children of Jaime Lannister if the rumors held. Complicated matters. "We'll want them under protective watch as well," he said. "Their innocence in all this madness. Let them remain in comfort, But see to it that the men guarding them are loyal to the crown, my crown. Barristan bowed again. As you command, your grace. Ned spoke up quietly. What of Sansa Stark? She was betrothed to Joffrey, and used as a hostage. She's in her old bedchamber, Barristan said, a note of sympathy threading his words, shaken but otherwise unhurt, tending to Arya with the help of Septa Mordain. Ned inclined his head. I'll see them both soon. Thank you, Ser Barristan. As the Kingsguard knight retreated from the Solar, Robert turned his attention back to the table of parchments. Some were battered scrolls with broken wax seals, each bearing a hasty message. He was a soldier in spirit, not a clerk, but he knew too well the necessity of swift, calculated communication. He traced a finger over one half-written missive. We must ensure the realm knows the truth, he said to Ned. That Joffrey is no true Baratheon, that Cersei betrayed me and the crown. But the realm also needs to know I live and rule once more. Ned, ever pragmatic, responded quietly. We ought to proceed with caution. If we fling around accusations without proof, the Lannisters will cry foul, and some lords might doubt your claim of resurrection. They will question why you vanished instead of returning to the capital. We need a strategy. Robert scowled in frustration. You're right. I can't simply rely on shock. Once Tywin Lannister learns of this, he'll raise the West against us if he thinks his grandchildren are threatened. And there's Jaime commanding forces around the Riverlands. He'll be bloody furious. Ned's gaze darkened at the mention of Jaime. There's no love lost between him and me. Ned hesitated, then added, I'd send ravens to the major houses to confirm the details. Summon them to attend you here, to witness you in the flesh. That alone might quell rebellion before it begins. Robert nodded. We must do it tonight. I'll not give Tywin or Jaime time to spin their own yarn. They spent the next hour drafting letters, however clumsily, confirming that Robert Baratheon had survived his wounds and returned to the throne. Ned wrote with his characteristic solemn clarity, explaining that Cersei Lannister had confessed to adultery with her brother, that Joffrey was therefore disinherited, and that King Robert had apprehended the false royals. The letters ended with a royal command that each house reaffirm its allegiance or face the king's wrath. From time to time, Robert paused, listening to the whisper of night wind at the window, half expecting to see Melisandre's silhouette in the darkness. The Red Woman had retreated after the day's events, offering neither explanation nor farewell. Robert suspected she was somewhere in the castle, performing her rites or meditating on flames. The memory of her power still unnerved him, but he could not deny that she had saved his life. When the letters were complete, Ned stacked them carefully. We'll send these to Winterfell, the Eyrie, Riverrun, Highgarden, Storm's End, and beyond. We must include Stannis on Dragonstone, and also Renly at Storm's End. He let the latter slip from his lips with a trace of apprehension. This may complicate things. Robert gave a rough chuckle. Renly and Stannis both had reason to think me dead. I don't doubt they're already scheming, but I've no appetite for civil war among my own blood. Ned sighed. And yet, it might come to that if they won't bend. Barristan re-entered, as if on cue, with another short bow. Ravens are ready, your grace. The maester awaits your sealed messages. He cleared his throat. I'd suggest we double the watchers at the rookery. We can't have Lannister sympathizers intercepting our ravens. See it done, Robert said, affixing the royal seal. And while you're at it, have men watch Pycelle. That old fool was always too deep in Lannister pockets. Barristan inclined his head. At once, Ned and Robert traded a knowing glance. Old Pycelle was capable of dithering, subterfuge, and petty sabotage. They could not afford to underestimate any Lannister loyalist. When Barristan left again, Ned rose from his seat, wincing at the pain in his leg. I should see my daughters. Robert reached out, clasping Ned's forearm. Go, Ned. They've suffered enough. Tomorrow we'll talk about forming a new small council. One that isn't a nest of vipers. Ned offered a faint, tired smile. Tomorrow, then. He shuffled out of the Solar, leaving Robert alone in the flickering firelight. Silence reigned, broken only by the rhythmic crackle of logs. For a time, Robert let the quiet surround him. The day's events still felt like a dream. The breath of the grave remained in his lungs, a cold memory that refused to vanish. But the day's triumph gave him renewed will. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive with purpose, however dire the trials to come. He sank into a heavy chair, ignoring the twinges of his wounds. The path ahead would be riddled with enemies. A part of him stirred with the old warrior's thrill. Let them come, he thought. I have a realm to protect and a friend to stand by me. Let them come. Across the city, in the maester's rookery perched high in the Red Keep, a clutch of ravens stirred at the arrival of men bearing sealed messages. By candlelight, the letters were carefully secured to the birds' legs. Night air swirled through the tower's shutters, carrying the scent of straw and droppings. One by one, the ravens were released, flapping into the darkness. Their wings bore the news that would shake the Seven Kingdoms. King Robert Baratheon lived, and his enemies were in chains. They flew north to Winterfell, east to the Eyrie, south to the Reach, west to the Westerlands, and especially to Dragonstone and Storm's End, where Stannis and Renly Baratheon would soon read words that defied all expectation. Several days later, in the towering gloom of Harrenhal's courtyard, Jaime Lannister received the first stunning report. He had taken Harrenhal in Tywin's name some weeks ago, but controlling the burned, haunted fortress was hardly a comfort. Its gargantuan walls loomed overhead, black and misshapen. The wind whistled through melted towers, sounding eerily like the wail of banshees. Jaime had grown to despise the place, but it was a strategic stronghold from which the Lannisters could project power into the Riverlands. He was in the midst of sparring with a group of knights when a panting messenger arrived, sliding off a lathered horse. The man's eyes shone with alarm. "Sir Jaime, there's news from King's Landing." Jaime, clad in gilded plate polished to a mirror sheen, wiped sweat from his brow. His golden hair clung to his forehead. He tossed aside a practiced sword, a sardonic smile on his lips. "Well, out with it then." The messenger swallowed hard. "Cersei and Prince Joffrey are taken prisoner by King Robert." Jaime froze. The courtyard seemed to tilt. He stared at the man as though he were mad. "That's impossible. The boar killed him. Robert is dead." "Not so, sir. Word says he survived, and he's retaken the throne in King's Landing." A raven arrived at dawn with a letter proclaiming. Jaime advanced on the messenger. "Proclaiming what?" he hissed, heartbeat thudding. That Joffrey is no true Baratheon. That you, Sir Jaime Lannister, are his real father. That the king had you all declared traitors. The man's voice quavered. "They say the boy is in chains, with Cersei too." A hush fell over the knights who had been sparring moments before. Jaime glared at them, lip curling. He felt molten fury bloom in his chest, mingled with a spike of something akin to fear for his sister and for Joffrey, who was still a child, however monstrous his behavior might have been. "And does the Raven's letter mention me by name?" "Yes, sir. It declares you an oathbreaker, a man who fathered children on his own sister. It calls on you to surrender, or face the king's justice." The messenger bent his head. "There's more. The letter is signed by Lord Eddard Stark, naming himself Hand of the King. It says that unless House Lannister swears fealty anew, hostilities will resume." Jaime's vision swam. Ned Stark, still alive and apparently forgiven. The last Jaime had heard, Eddard Stark was a prisoner slated for execution. "This is madness," he spat, though a part of him realized that if Robert had truly survived, then indeed everything might have changed. He clenched his jaw. "Gather the men. We ride to meet my father at once." A roar of approval rose from the knights behind him. They wanted war, they had expected war from the start. But Jaime's mind churned with conflicting impulses. He wanted to race to King's Landing to free Cersei and Joffrey. Yet blindly charging there would be suicide if the City Watch had turned wholeheartedly to Robert. They'd face a capital full of men loyal to the old king, and, by the 7, he might indeed be unstoppable if half the realm believed he had cheated death. Jaime forced his anger under control. Tywin Lannister would have a plan. His father always did. If Tywin had not yet received the news, he would soon, and then the real game would begin. He turned to Ser Adam Marbrand, one of his most trusted commanders. "Ready the men for departure," Jaime said. "We march west. Father is near the Golden Tooth, I believe, rallying forces. We join him, and we decide how best to crush this miracle." His sneer deepened on the word miracle. He did not believe in miracles, and if Robert Baratheon truly lived, then Jaime would kill him a second time, boar or no boar. Fury twisted in his gut at the thought of Joffrey in chains. The messenger watched Jaime uncertainly. "Is there no chance, Ser Jaime, that the letter is a false rumor? That Robert's truly dead?" Jaime shook his head. "Even if it were, we can't risk ignoring it. I mean to find out the truth. Now go. Spread the word to break camp." As the messenger scurried off, Jaime looked up at the scorched towers of Harrenhal. He wanted to spit. Another fiasco. He and his father had planned for a scenario in which Joffrey was safely on the throne. This changes everything. With cold determination, he resolved to see Robert's ruin. If the king thought to keep Cersei in a dank dungeon, he would soon learn what it meant to enrage House Lannister. Meanwhile, across the continent, the Ravens found other lords in their halls. In the Vale, Lady Lisa Arryn read the letter and turned pale, shutting herself in her chambers with fear of the new power shift. In the Reach, Mace Tyrell, Lord of Highgarden, summoned his bannermen with a mixture of curiosity and caution. If King Robert truly lived, the Tyrells needed to decide whether to bend the knee anew or seek advantage in any emerging conflict. In Riverrun, Edmure Tully breathed a sigh of relief at hearing that Ned Stark was not only alive but again Hand of the King, hoping this might spare the Riverlands further devastation. At Storm's End, the seat of House Baratheon's younger scion, Renly Baratheon, the letter arrived in the early dawn. Renly read it in stunned silence, standing alone on the castle ramparts while gulls wheeled overhead. The wind rippled through his green doublet, and his jaw tightened. Ned Stark's measured words described Robert's miraculous revival and the downfall of Joffrey. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over Renly. He had been quietly and recently entertaining the notion that the Iron Throne might be his. After all, Stannis was humorless and unloved by most lords, and Robert was, well, Robert had been on his deathbed. But that was no longer the case. He lowered the parchment and stared at the sea stretching endlessly before him. "By the 7, he murmured, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. If Robert truly lived and demanded that Renly present himself in King's Landing, there would be no immediate chance to push his own claim. But was that a relief or a disappointment? He cared for Robert, but he also knew that Robert's rule had grown stagnant and reckless. If the old Robert had truly come back, invigorated by some mystery, then Renly might have no path to the throne for many years. Still, it was better than chaos. Better to see the realm stabilized than burn in civil war. Renly read the letter again, brow furrowed, sensing the tension in each line. Robert promised that any house that declared loyalty would find favor. Those who spurned him would be declared traitors. The letter left no room for neutrality. He frowned, remembering how easily the City Watch had turned on Ned Stark. The alliances in King's Landing were fickle. Then again, perhaps the small folks' awe at Robert's resurrection, if that was truly what had happened, would hold them to his side. The letter ended with a scrawl of Robert's signature, that huge, unsubtle style Renly recognized as his brother's. He folded the parchment slowly. "Ser Loras," he called, turning to see the Knight of Flowers approach. "Yes, my lord," Loras Tyrell asked softly, glancing at the letter with curiosity. He was clad in green and gold, the Tyrell colors, his long brown hair framing a handsome face. "Prepare to ride. We go to King's Landing. The king demands all banners, and I must see with my own eyes what's happened there." A flicker of excitement danced over Loras's face. "As you command." Shall I gather your household knights as well?" Renly nodded, stepping away from the ramparts. "Yes, and make sure they're well turned out. If Robert truly sits the throne again, the realm will be in flux. We must make a strong impression." He gave the gulls one last look, an odd swirl of relief and regret warring in him. If Robert was truly himself again, the old easy laughter might return. Some semblance of the brother Renly had adored in his youth. Perhaps that alone made the journey worthwhile. On Dragonstone, the narrow castle halls echoed with storms that lashed the rocky island. Stannis Baratheon stood in his solar, reading the parchment by the flickering glow of a brazier. His face remained stone. Only the tightening of his jaw betrayed the royal beneath. Melisandre had left him weeks ago, announcing that the Lord of Light had a greater task for her elsewhere. Now he saw, in black and white, part of what that task had entailed. The Red Woman had resurrected Robert Baratheon from the brink of death. Stannis read the letter in silence, each word heavy as lead. Ned Stark wrote that Robert lived and had taken back his rightful seat, imprisoning the false royals. The letter ended with a calm but unmistakable summons. "Your king calls you to King's Landing, Lord Stannis, in the name of our shared blood and the realm's peace." Shared blood. The phrase twisted Stannis's mouth into a bitter line. For years he had believed that, upon Robert's demise, he would be next in line, especially with Joffrey proven to be no Baratheon at all. A part of him still believed that. He was older than Renly, after all, and the rightful heir if Robert was truly dead. But Robert was not dead. In fact, the letter declared that Robert demanded loyalty. "It seems the Lord of Light has played me for a fool," Stannis said aloud, voice low. His castellan, the elderly Ser Roland Storm, ventured a cautionary remark. "If King Robert truly lives, my lord, it spares the realm a civil war. Surely that is good news." Stannis's mouth tightened. He recalled Melisandre's cryptic assurances. She had told him more than once that he was the chosen instrument of R'hllor, that the flames showed him crowned in the light of righteousness. Yet she had used her magic to save Robert. Either her visions had been mistaken, or her true agenda was murkier than Stannis had realized. "And what of the throne, Ser Roland?" Stannis asked. "Am I never to wear the crown if Robert remains? Will I be overshadowed once more, as I have been my entire life?" His voice dripped with resentment. Ser Roland hesitated. "My lord, I cannot say, but your brother calls you to King's Landing. Perhaps he means to reward your loyalty. You remain the Lord of Dragonstone. You are a Baratheon prince." Stannis said nothing for a long moment. A wave of jealousy coursed through him. He had never been beloved, never truly recognized for his tireless service. If not for the illusions around Joffrey, Stannis would have crowned himself by now. Yet, ironically, the letter read as if Robert expected him to come. Ned Stark had always been a man of Han. Or, perhaps he believed reuniting the Baratheons was best for the realm. At last, Stannis said, "Prepare the fleet. We sail as soon as the storms abate. If Robert wants my fealty, he shall have it, or I shall see if I can wrest the truth of this resurrection from his Red Woman." He placed the letter carefully on a table. The brazier's glow danced over his gaunt features, emphasizing the severity of his expression. Loyalty to family or ambition for the throne. He was torn between them. But the letter from King's Landing did not request. It demanded. Stannis was not a man to bow easily. Yet the realm had no need for another war. He felt, for the 1,000th time, the press of duty heavier than any crown. If Melisandre had restored Robert, perhaps she had turned her eyes from Stannis's destiny. Or perhaps, Stannis thought grimly, "I must see for myself what destiny remains for me." Back in the Red Keep, King Robert's court was an uneasy tapestry of guard patrols, new alliances, and hushed speculation. With Joffrey and Cersei in the dungeons, Robert ordered a thorough sweep of the royal apartments, removing any Lannister guards found within. Pycelle was placed under watch. Varys lingered in the shadows, smiling politely, ever the spymaster with uncertain loyalties. Littlefinger had vanished, presumably fleeing the city to preserve his own schemes. In the cramped council chamber, Robert sat at the head of the table with Ned Stark to his right. The chairs for other counselors were conspicuously empty, though Ser Barristan stood behind Robert, arms folded. Two men from the city watch, a new commander and a trusted captain, stood near the door to ensure no threats slithered in. Robert tapped the table with blunt fingers. The realm has been put on notice. Now we wait for replies, and we brace for Lannister retaliation. Ned, what news from the Riverlands? Ned rested his palms on the table. Riverrun remains uneasy. Your nephew, Joffrey, had unleashed Gregor Clegane and other marauders in the region to punish the Tullus for rumored support of me. Now that you've reclaimed the throne, the Tullus hope you'll put an end to the brigands. Lord Tywin is rumored to be near the Golden Tooth, raising forces under Jaime's command. No doubt they've heard the news by now. We can expect them to move. Let them, Robert rumbled. If Tywin's wise, he'll see the game is up. If not, we'll meet him in the field. This time, I'll not sit idle in a wine-soaked haze. Ser Barristan placed a gentle hand on the table's edge. Your Grace, the men are still rallying to your side, but we must show a measure of mercy to ensure the city remains calm. Many here once cheered for Joffrey. They might fear retribution. Robert sighed. I'm not out to butcher small folk. They can keep their heads so long as they cause no trouble. But Lannister men who remain loyal to that whelp? I won't be gentle. This city must know it has one king, not 1,000 claimants. Ned shifted in his seat. Agreed. The sooner we show the realm your strength and your willingness to restore peace, the sooner the lords will bend the knee without bloodshed. A soft rap on the door interrupted them. In walked a steward bearing a sealed letter. A raven, Your Grace. It arrived from Highgarden not an hour ago. Robert took the letter, broke the seal, and scanned the contents. His eyebrows lifted. So, Mace Tyrell addresses me as my most gracious king, and writes to request an immediate audience. He snorted, tossing the parchment onto the table. He extends formal support to the crown, provided I express my continuing friendship by reaffirming certain trade pacts and, let me guess, forging a marriage alliance. Ned's mouth twitched at the corner. That sounds like Mace Tyrell. He always wants something in exchange for loyalty. The Tyrells aren't subtle. Robert rubbed his chin. I can't blame them for wanting surety. The realm is in flux. I suppose I'll have to entertain them if they come. Highgarden's support is no small thing. Their harvests feed half the kingdoms. Ned nodded. Without the reach, we risk famine in the capital. Robert leaned back, scowling. It's all well and good, but I have no children to offer now. My so-called son is rotting in the dungeons. Tommen and Myrcella, well, I doubt the Tyrells want bastard-born Lannisters. And my brother Stannis has no marriageable daughters. Ned lifted a shoulder. Renly might be open to something, if the Tyrells are so set on forging ties to House Baratheon. Ser Loras is already close to Renly. He paused, recalling that particular friendship. It could prove beneficial to both sides. Robert gave a dry chuckle. Perhaps. We'll see what Mace has in mind. Let them come to court. If they want my favor, they can declare it openly, no half measures. He set the letter aside. Next, he said to the steward, let's have a meal brought in here. I'm weary of planning on an empty stomach. The steward bowed out. Ned cast a glance at Robert. You should rest, Robert. Your wounds. I'm fine, Robert growled. Compared to the grave, this is a pleasure. Ned did not press the matter. The rest of the day was a swirl of administrative chores. Hearing petitions from merchants seeking assurance that trade would remain stable, reassigning loyal men to city guard posts, and reviewing the finances of the crown, which, to Robert's disgruntlement, were in dire shape. Littlefinger's schemes had left a web of debts. Through it all, Robert's renewed determination never wavered. He might not relish the day-to-day tediousness of kingship, but this time he would see it done. By dusk, the king in hand emerged from the council chamber, stiff-limbed and exhausted. Robert parted ways with Ned near the corridor leading to the Tower of the Hand. "Go to your daughters," he told his friend. "Let them see you safe. I'll see myself to my chambers." Ned inclined his head, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Thank you, Your Grace." Ned limped off, and Robert strode through the winding hallways of the Red Keep. Armed guards snapped to attention at each corner, bowing as he passed. He felt a twinge of pride and a deeper swirl of relief. This time, he meant to be a king they would not scorn behind closed doors. When he reached his bedchamber, he found the door guarded by 2 gold cloaks wearing the new insignia of a crowned stag over the heart. They opened the door. Inside, the room was lit by a single torch, and Robert halted in mild surprise. Melisandre stood by the window, her scarlet robes a stark contrast against the stone. She turned, the ruby at her throat catching the torchlight, giving her an unearthly glow. "Your Grace," she said softly. Robert closed the door behind him. A swirl of conflicting emotions stirred. He remembered the heat of the magic that had burned through his chest when he had been brought back. He remembered how her voice had cut through the darkness. Yet the idea of being indebted to any god set his teeth on edge. "Priestess," he acknowledged, "I was wondering when you'd show yourself." Her lips curved in a faint, inscrutable smile. "I have been watching, always. The Lord of Light commanded me to restore you so you might shape the fate of these kingdoms. I have done as I was bid." Robert tossed his gloves onto a table, eyeing her warily. "You've done more than that. You changed the entire realm's destiny by saving me. My question remains, why?" She stepped closer, the faint scent of exotic incense clinging to her robes. "Because the flames showed me a great darkness if Cersei and her children seized full control. Because the realm needed a decisive hand, a living king who would stand against the shadows gathering in the far north and beyond the seas. I have seen glimpses of a terror that stirs in the land of always winter." Robert exhaled, half remembering fragments of Ned's old talk of White Walkers and ancient evils. He had dismissed such stories as old wives' tales. But if sorcery could return him from the grave, perhaps other nightmares were real too. "You speak in riddles. Winter is always coming if you ask the Starks. That doesn't mean dead men walk." Melisandre's red eyes gleamed. "Believe what you will. My role was to bring you back so that the realm will be united under a strong king when the true war begins." He studied her in silence. The notion of a true war unsettled him. He was already bracing for war with the Lannisters. Did this priestess foresee something worse? He grunted. "Well, you have your living king, but be warned, I'm no puppet. If your god expects me to worship him blindly," she inclined her head, "you are free to do as you wish, Your Grace, but the fire burns as it wills. Should you find yourself in need of that power again, remember that lawless light casts out darkness." For a moment, they stood in a tense hush, the torch sputtering. Then Robert nodded curtly. "I'll remember." He had no further appetite for cryptic prophecy. Taking that as dismissal, Melisandre bowed in a fluid motion and glided past him toward the door. Before she left, she paused. "I have sent letters of my own to certain red priests in the east. They, too, will speak of the miracle of your resurrection. Men seek wonders. They will see one in you. That can be a sword and shield, if you wield it." With that, she slipped out into the corridor. Robert exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He was bone-tired. The days ahead promised more politics, more battles, and possibly nightmares beyond mortal scope, if Melisandre's warnings held truth. "One thing at a time," he muttered to the flickering torch. "One thing at a time." Days passed, and the city slowly adjusted to the new rule. Cersei and Joffrey languished in the dungeons, while Tommen and Myrcella remained under watch in their chambers, neither truly free nor harshly imprisoned. Several members of the Kingsguard, uncertain of their fates, offered renewed allegiance to Robert, among them Ser Meryn Trant and Ser Aerys Oakhart. But Robert, guided by Ned, kept them at arm's length until their true loyalties could be tested. Amid the swirl of rearranging power, the first arrivals from the other great houses began trickling into King's Landing. Minor lords and knights, seeking favor or fearing punishment, came to swear loyalty. The grandest arrival occurred a fortnight after Robert's dramatic return. Lord Mace Tyrell swept into the city with his retinue, accompanied by his sons Loras and Garland, and 1,000 Tyrell soldiers, their green banners streaming. The small folk gawked at the splendor. Dozens of wagons laden with provisions, processions of floridly dressed retainers, and bright music. They found King Robert in the throne room, seated on the Iron Throne in a battered but dignified posture. Ned Stark stood beside him, expression calm but watchful. A large crowd had gathered to witness the meeting. Torches sputtered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows. Highgarden's retinue advanced, and Mace Tyrell, a stout man with a carefully trimmed mustache, knelt heavily before the throne. His sons followed suit, though Loras's face betrayed flickers of caution. "Your Grace," Mace Tyrell boomed, "it warms my heart to see you hale and healthy. Highgarden rejoices in your recovery and your rightful reclaiming of the throne." Robert inclined his head. "Lord Tyrell, I trust your journey was uneventful." Mace rose with a theatrical sigh. "All the roads chatter of your miraculous survival. I said to myself, the gods favor King Robert indeed, and so must we. May I present my sons? Ser Loras, the Knight of Flowers, you know well, and Ser Garland, newly knighted." Garland, taller than Loras and less famed for tournament feats, bowed with a polite smile. Loras offered a half-bow, glancing sidelong at Ned and Robert. Robert recalled that Loras was close to Renly, who had not yet arrived in the capital. That alone sparked curiosity about the Tyrells' deeper intentions. Mace Tyrell cleared his throat and launched into a grandiose speech. "We of Highgarden come to reaffirm our fealty to the crown. The wickedness that tried to usurp your throne has been cast down. We pledge our swords and our harvests to you, your grace, in exchange for your benevolent leadership." Robert, who despised long-winded formalities, forced a tight smile. "You have my thanks," he said, voice echoing in the hall. "And we welcome Highgarden's strength in these troubled times. There are many threats to the peace. I'll be counting on you, Mace, to keep the Reach secure." Mace puffed out his chest. "But of course, your grace. I stand ready to serve. If you'll allow, I would request a private audience. There are matters of alliance I'd wish to discuss. The future of the realm is best secured with, certain mutual understandings." Robert resisted an eye roll. "Very well. We'll speak soon. For now, rest from your travels. The Master of Coin will see to your hospitality." He remembered a beat too late that Littlefinger was nowhere to be found, so he glanced at Ned. "Or the hand will." Ned stepped in smoothly. "My men will escort you to suitable quarters, Lord Tyrell. We'll send for you when the king is ready to speak further." With that, the ceremonial greeting ended. As the Tyrell party retreated, Robert released a breath. He leaned toward Ned, speaking low enough so only he could hear. "He wants to wed someone to someone, no doubt." Ned gave a small nod. "Either that or press for positions at court. But we need the Tyrells' harvests and men. It may be a price worth paying." Robert grimaced. "Let's just hope it doesn't involve me tying myself to some young Tyrell maiden. I've had enough disastrous marriages." Ned said nothing, but his eyes softened in memory of the fiasco that was Robert's marriage to Cersei. They adjourned from the throne room to a smaller audience chamber, where they received fresh news from the gates. Other minor lords trickling in, some swearing fealty swiftly, others waiting to see which way the wind blew. News also came of robber knights in the Crownlands, uncertain whether the realm had a king or not. Robert commanded that the Gold Cloaks expand patrols, ensuring no lawlessness spread in his name. That evening, Robert hosted a modest feast for the new arrivals in the Great Hall. It lacked the ostentatious splendor of times past. Most gold had been drained by the previous handlings of Littlefinger, but it was enough to convey a sense of stable rule. Roasted meats, fresh bread, and barrels of ale. Mace Tyrell sat near Robert, regaling him with half-bombastic tales of Highgarden's wonders. Loras Tyrell, seated further down, cast glances around the hall, as if seeking someone. Ned Stark dined quietly, occasionally murmuring to Ser Barristan or exchanging a few words with other lords. Sansa Stark made a brief appearance, accompanied by Arya, though they soon withdrew to retire for the night, both still raw from the trauma they had endured. Partway through the feast, a herald rushed in, breathless. "Your Grace, Lord Renly Baratheon has entered the city. He requests an audience immediately." A hush rippled through the hall. Robert set his goblet down. "Bring him in." Moments later, Renly Baratheon strode into the great hall, flanked by a small honor guard in Baratheon livery. He wore a finely cut green doublet lined with gold, the crowned stag of House Baratheon emblazoned on his chest. Behind him, Ser Loras Tyrell stood beaming with pride, having quietly joined Renly's retinue upon their arrival. Renly advanced, wearing an uncertain smile. He sank to one knee before the dais. "Your Grace, brother. I heard you were alive." Robert rose from his seat, ignoring the twinge in his side. An unusual warmth filled his chest at the sight of his youngest brother. Though they had never been as close as Robert and Ned, or as Robert and Stannis once were, the Baratheon blood tie still held meaning. "Renly," he said, voice thick with an unexpected emotion. "You made haste." Renly looked up with a relieved grin. "I had to see for myself. When last I heard, you were dying. And now you stand hale as ever." Robert let out a bark of laughter. "Not quite as ever, but I'm alive. On your feet, man." He extended a hand, and Renly rose, pulling his older brother into a brief, awkward embrace. A ripple of subdued applause swept the hall. The moment was not entirely free of tension, though. Robert knew Renly had likely been considering his own claim to the throne. But for now, he suppressed any conflict. He waved a hand at the dais. "Come sit. I'd hear your news." Renly joined the high table, ignoring some suspicious glances from older lords who sensed the undercurrents. Mace Tyrell beamed at him. Obviously, the Tyrells were leaning strongly toward an alliance with this younger Baratheon. Loras Tyrell discreetly placed himself near Renly, a silent show of solidarity. The king resumed his seat, wincing slightly. "Well, brother, did you come alone?" Renly shook his head. "With a handful of knights from Storm's End, plus Ser Loras and some of his father's men, though Lord Mace traveled separately. We arrived at nearly the same time by chance." Robert smirked. "I suppose it's good timing. The realm needs unity. Stannis might be on his way as well. Have you heard word?" Renly paused, exchanging a quick look with Loras. "I haven't had a raven from Dragonstone, but I suspect if your summons reached him, he'll come. We all know how literal Stannis is with duties." A faint laugh trickled around the table. Robert nodded, feeling a pang of old guilt about how often he had overlooked Stannis's virtues. "Yes, well, we'll see. For now, let's raise a cup to House Baratheon." A toast was made, wine splashing into cups. Robert drained his goblet in a quick gulp. The flavor reminded him that he had once been near the brink of oblivion, undone by too much wine, a monstrous boar, and Lannister intrigues. Yet here he was. He set the goblet down with a firm clang, feeling the eyes of lords upon him. The feast continued with more measured conversation. Renly recounted minor skirmishes along the Stormlands borders with robber knights. Mace Tyrell boasted of the wealth of Highgarden, proclaiming it at Robert's disposal. Ned Stark, listening intently, offered calm suggestions about coordinating supply lines. Through it all, Robert could not help but notice the closeness between Renly and Loras. If the Tyrells sought to entrench themselves in Baratheon power, that might be one path, and it did not bother Robert so long as it helped keep the realm together. Eventually, the night wore on. Some lords drifted away to bed, others to more private pursuits in the city. Robert, fatigued, clapped Renly on the shoulder and excused himself from the table. Ned Stark followed, and they stepped out into the courtyard, the sky above clear and strewn with stars. The crisp air felt like a blessing after the stuffiness of the great hall. "They're all wondering how you lived," Ned observed softly. Many have asked me if it was trickery, or if you truly died. Robert grunted. I've heard the whispers, but let them wonder. The spectacle alone might hold the realm together if they think I have the favor of some god. Ned shot him a guarded look. And do you believe that? Robert paused, gazing at the massive stone walls of the Red Keep. I don't know, Ned, but I know that boar gutted me. I felt its tusks tear my flesh. And I know I woke days later with Melisandre chanting over me. A flicker of dark humor crossed his face. If that's not God's magic, I don't know what is. Ned gave a slow nod. We live in strange times. They stood there a moment longer, letting the breeze ripple their cloaks. An uneasy feeling pricked at Robert. The Lannisters were not a beaten foe. Tywin and Jaime would not sit idle while Cersei and Joffrey were locked away, awaiting trial. The Seven Kingdoms might soon be ablaze with war. But for the moment, at least, the capital was his to command. At length, Robert turned back indoors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, one of which was Mace Tyrell's inevitable request for a private audience. And still there was no word from Stannis. Robert could almost picture his brother on the deck of a ship, face grim, as he neared King's Landing. And beyond that, somewhere, Tywin Lannister gathered swords for a fight that could shatter the peace once again. In the golden dawn that followed, Robert found himself in the Royal Solar once more, seated at a table with Mace Tyrell, Loras Tyrell, Ned Stark, and Renly Baratheon. Servants poured wine, though it was early for drinking. Robert took only a small sip, determined not to let old vices creep in. Mace Tyrell, wearing sumptuous garments of green and gold, cleared his throat. Your Grace, I'll be direct. Highgarden stands with you, unwaveringly. But we must consider the future of the realm. The Lannisters will not surrender easily, nor will other potential threats. To ensure a strong alliance between our houses, might I suggest a union? Robert raised an eyebrow, glancing around. Ned's face was impassive. Renly's lips quirked, as though he had anticipated this. Go on, Robert said. Mace folded his hands on his ample belly. My daughter, Margaery Tyrell, is of marriageable age, and while you, my king, have no living legitimate heirs from the queen. He coughed awkwardly, glancing at Ned. It might be prudent to secure one. Margaery is fair, kind, and the realm would rejoice to see the king wed to a maiden from the Reach. A heavy silence fell. Robert's mind recoiled at the suggestion of stepping once more into the bonds of matrimony, especially so soon after learning the full extent of Cersei's betrayals. Yet, from a purely political standpoint, a new queen from House Tyrell would indeed solidify the largest breadbasket in Westeros behind him. He found himself uncertain how to respond, so he looked to Ned, who spoke gently. It's not a decision to be made lightly, my lord. The realm is still reeling from the knowledge that Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella are not yours. If you remarried, it might quell the succession question. Your Grace, the matter of heirs is not a trifling concern. Renly cleared his throat. But is it wise to marry again so quickly? The realm has not even settled from the shock of your resurrection. Mace Tyrell waved a florid hand. If we wait too long, who knows what rumors may spread. A wedding would be a joyous occasion to unite the kingdom. And Margaery is quite beloved by the people. She's known for her charity in Highgarden, her kindness to the poor. Robert snorted softly. Charity to the poor? Would that quell the swords of Tywin Lannister? Mace Tyrell gave a grand smile, as though oblivious to the sarcasm. She would quell hearts, your grace. The swords we can quell together with the might of Highgarden and the crown. Imagine the festivities, the show of force, and the demonstration that King Robert is truly in command. A storm of conflicting thoughts battered Robert's mind. A part of him wanted to rage at the notion of being forced into another political marriage. Another part recognized the cold logic. The Tyrell's power was vital, and if Margaery could help unify the realm, perhaps that was a small price to pay. Still, he had only just ripped Cersei from the throne. The idea of wedding again felt like raw friction on an open wound. He exhaled. I'll consider it, he said finally. I won't be pressed into a decision today. The realm's stability is the priority. If a marriage to your daughter could help, then so be it. But I'll need to meet the girl myself." Mace Tyrell beamed, clearly interpreting that as near consent. "Of course, Your Grace. I shall send for her. She's currently at Highgarden, but I can have her here within a fortnight, perhaps sooner." Robert rubbed his temples. "Do it if you must, but I make no promises yet." Mace's smile dimmed slightly, though he nodded graciously. "Understood, Your Grace." Renly eyed Loras with a knowing look, as if to say, "Here it begins." Loras shifted in his seat, his face mostly unreadable. Ned sat quietly, letting Robert handle the negotiations. Eventually, Mace Tyrell rose, bowing. "I'll leave you to your duties then, Your Grace. My family is at your service." With that, Mace and Loras departed. Robert noticed Loras linger a moment, exchanging a nod with Renly, before following his father out. The door closed behind them, leaving Robert, Ned, and Renly in a tense hush. "So," Robert said gruffly, "they want to tie me to Marjorie Tyrell. Is she pretty enough that I can stomach it?" He tried for levity, but his heart wasn't in it. Renly let out a small chuckle. "She's widely considered beautiful, brother, with a keen mind. She's certainly more pleasant than Cersei. No offense intended to your previous union." Ned gave a mild cough, glancing at Robert. "You must consider the realm. With the Tyrells fully on our side, we'll have the breadbasket and a huge host. If the Lannisters march, we'll need that. And if not the Lannisters, you know how quickly a new threat can arise." Robert's jaw worked. I see that. But let's not rush." He turned to Renly. "And what of you, brother? Are you plotting any marriages with the Tyrells?" Renly blinked, then a faint color touched his cheeks. "No, I know." He coughed awkwardly. "Though I suspect Mace Tyrell might have offered me a daughter if you refused. He wants his line bound to the Baratheons." Robert snorted. "Ever the cunning flower, Mace." They spoke no further on the marriage question. Instead, they turned to war. Robert fixed Ned with a grave look. "We've heard nothing from Tywin Lannister or Jaime. That can't be good. Our scouts say the Lannister forces are massing near the Golden Tooth. They've recalled men from the Riverlands. My guess is they mean to strike soon." Renly folded his arms. "If they do, they risk open rebellion from the other houses. The Lannisters can't hope to overthrow a living king with half the realm behind him. Still, they're dangerous." Ned grimaced. "Tywin might gamble that some lords will hesitate to follow a king rumored to have come back from the dead through dark magic." Robert felt a surge of frustration. He was no sorcerer, and the realm's superstitions could be turned against him. "We'll prove to them I need no black arts to smash Lannisters. If Jaime or Tywin marches, we'll meet them with force. I have no intention of letting them threaten the crown or hold the Riverlands hostage." Ned inclined his head. "Then perhaps we should prepare an army to march to the Riverlands. Riverrun has always been aligned with the Starks and Tullis, and they might now back you wholeheartedly. We can place a host near the crossroads. If the Lannisters try to move east, we stop them." Renly tapped a finger on the table. "I'll contribute men from the Stormlands. The Tyrells can be asked to send a portion of their strength to bolster the Crownlands. And if Stannis arrives with ships, that adds a seaborne threat to the Lannister supply lines." Robert's face hardened with resolve. "Good, let's do it. We won't wait for them to set the field. Ned, gather the loyal lords who have arrived. We need to discuss war plans in detail." A measure of grim excitement filled the air. All three men sensed that the realm was poised on the brink of a conflict that could dwarf even Robert's rebellion. But this time, Robert's fury was not directed at Targaryens. It was at the family who had once called him kin by marriage. They parted ways to make preparations. Ned went to rally the various lords to a war council, while Renly offered to speak with Mace Tyrell about committing men. Robert was left alone in the audience chamber, feeling the ghost of an old thrill. The call to battle, the chance to prove his kingship by strength of arms. No more complacency, no more drowning in wine while others tugged at the strings of power. If the Lannisters wanted a fight, by the gods, he would give them one. He glanced at the dagger on his belt, remembering with a dark pang how swiftly life could end. But he had been to the edge of the grave. He had no intention of going back there before the realm was secure. In the west, at Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister stood on a high balcony, gazing out at the jagged cliffs and the churning sea. A raven's message lay crushed in his fist. He had read it 3 times, each pass deepening his fury. Robert Baratheon was alive, Joffrey and Cersei imprisoned, the allegations of incest made public. And Jaime was at Harrenhal, presumably gathering men to unify with Tywin's host. Tywin's face was as immovable as quarried stone, but his mind churned. Cersei and Joffrey lost, the throne reclaimed. The Lannister name dragged through the mud. And to make matters worse, many lords would now flock to Robert's side, enthralled by the story of a king who had defied death. It was a potent legend, one that could fracture Lannister alliances quickly. He turned to his brother, Kevan Lannister, who waited near the balcony doors. "Summon the bannermen," Tywin said in an icy voice. "We march at once to meet Jaime. We cannot let King Robert gather the entire realm against us. If we strike swiftly, we might capture the Riverlands and force Robert to treat for terms." Kevan swallowed. "And if that fails? If they are as strong as rumored?" Tywin's green eyes blazed. "Then we fight. The Lannister name will not be trampled underfoot by a drunken oaf who got lucky with some Red Witch's help." He tossed the crushed parchment onto the balcony floor. The wind seized it, fluttering it away into the sea's tumult. The old lion's wrath was awakened. He would show the realm that Lannisters did not yield, no matter what miracle had supposedly resurrected the Stag King. Thus, while ravens fluttered, alliances formed, and armies began to stir, King Robert Baratheon prepared for war. Messages flew to the north, where Robb Stark was being groomed as Ned's heir, and to the Vale, where Lysa Arryn vacillated. In the city, a subdued sense of anticipation settled over the small folk. Their king, it seemed, was not content to rule from the shadows, but would soon lead armies to victory or doom. Robert himself kept to a grueling schedule. Mornings were spent in war councils, afternoons in the training yard where he pushed his healing body to swing hammer or sword again, and evenings in the solar with Ned and Renly, discussing strategies for forging alliances. He refused to let his new lease on life decay into the indulgence that had once consumed him. On more than one occasion, he found himself tempted by a cask of wine, the memory of old escapes tugging at him. But always he remembered Ned's face, half in shadow, on the steps of Baelor's September, and the monstrous boar that had nearly ended his reign. He'd been given a second chance, and he would not squander it. As the days slipped by, King's Landing braced for more arrivals, and, perhaps, for conflict. The great Game of Thrones was poised at a tipping point, with the resurrected stag on one side and the lion rearing on the other. The game's outcome would shape the fate of Westeros in ways none could yet foresee. And all the while, in the Red Keep's cryptic corridors, the Red Woman watched with quiet eyes, her ruby gleaming in the gloom. The fires of R'hllor had given the realm one man back from the jaws of death. Whether that gift would save the kingdom or plunge it deeper into war remained shrouded in the flame's ever-shifting vision. Below is a continuous piece of narrative prose, written in the style of a professional novelist, continuing seamlessly from the previous events. It features King Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark investigating Peter Baelish's role in the recent turmoil, while holding off on arresting him. It strives for rich detail, lore consistency, and a fluid story flow without subtitles or section breaks. The length aims for roughly 6,500 words, though natural variations may occur in the course of storytelling. A few days had passed since the grand arrival of Lord Mace Tyrell and Renly's triumphant return to King's Landing. Within the Red Keep, corridors once rife with Lannister influences slowly took on the crowned stag's presence anew. Banners bearing the Baratheon sigil hung from high rafters. Roving patrols of gold cloaks wore freshly embroidered patches over their hearts. The transformation was subtle yet steady, a sign that King Robert truly meant to rule again, this time, without letting the city slip into the cunning grip of schemers. Inside a cramped room off the Royal Solar, Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon sat facing each other across a plain wooden table. This room, once used by scribes to store dusty ledgers, had been converted into a secure place for private discussions, away from prying ears. A single stout candle flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Behind them, standing guard, was Ser Barristan Selmy. Ever watchful, he kept one hand near the pommel of his sword, ready for trouble should it come. Robert exhaled. "I wish this war council nonsense were the only matter at hand," he muttered. "But there's a rat scuttling in the dark, and I'd wager it's Peter Baelish." Ned, elbows propped on the table, rubbed his temples. "Yes, we both know the man played a part in my imprisonment. He fed me half-truths about the City Watch's loyalty, and I believed him. When I confronted Cersei, expecting the gold cloaks to secure the palace in my name, well, we know how that ended." Robert grunted, leaning back in his chair. Though his injuries from the boar's tusks still gave him aches, he hid it well. "I never did trust that sly little climber. Always whispering, always wearing that mocking smile." He shook his head, as though trying to dislodge the memory of Littlefinger prowling the royal corridors. "We still don't know how deep his intrigues run, or how far back they go. Did he conspire with the Lannisters fully, or did he simply seize an opportunity?" Ned let out a quiet breath. "I can't say for certain, but the man's cunning. He grew up at Riverrun as a ward of House Tully and lost a duel for my wife's hand when we were younger. He's worn many masks since. If I had to guess, I'd say he served himself first and foremost. If siding with the Lannisters gave him power, he'd do it. If turning on them later might give him more, he'd do that too." Robert frowned. And now, with Cersei and Joffrey in the dungeons, he might see a new angle. Perhaps even turning to us with open hands, claiming innocence. He grimaced. "But that man is about as innocent as a vulture on a battlefield." Ned's lips pressed into a thin line. "Still, he vanished from King's Landing right around the time you returned. No one's found him. Rumor says he fled by night, possibly on a ship heading north or east." He paused, remembering the chaos of those days. "Some say the gold cloaks nearly caught him at the docks, but he bribed them with heavy coin. Others claim they saw him wearing a traveling cloak in the Baelor's September district. We can't pin down a single truth." Robert tapped his broad fingers on the table, thoughts churning. "If we arrest him the moment he shows his face, we might lose the chance to see what he's truly plotting. He's a slippery sort. I doubt we'll glean all his secrets by tossing him in a cell and torturing him. That's not your style, Ned, and it's not how I want to handle things." Ned inclined his head, relieved. "No, it isn't, but we must be careful. He's one man, yes, but a dangerous one. He has spies, a web of informants in brothels and gambling dens, people who owe him coin, people who rely on him for bribes or for the clearing of debts. And beyond that, he can set lords against one another with a few well-placed lies." Robert's scowl deepened. That's half the reason the realm was in such a mess even before I fell at that damned boar hunt. Littlefinger and his cunning coin-counting ways, always conjuring gold from the air, or so it seemed. In truth, we were drowning in debt, and he was playing the game with the Iron Bank and the Lannisters." He paused, then asked in a quieter voice, "Ned, do you think Baelish wanted me dead?" Ned pondered that. He recalled the swirl of intrigues that had consumed the capital. Littlefinger had never openly displayed disloyalty to Robert. He had always seemed more interested in meddling with Ned's appointment as hand or forging secret alliances. He might not have cared if you died or not, only how he could benefit. If he predicted the Lannisters would rule, he might have chosen to align with them. Then, if that turned sour, he'd pivot in another direction. Robert nodded, mouth set. "We must watch for any sign of him. If he returns," Ned interjected. "We can't afford to arrest him the moment he steps through the gates, not until we know what he intends. If we corner him too soon, he'll vanish again." or he'll feign cooperation and feed us only what he wants us to hear. Better to keep him thinking he's safe, so he reveals his true hand. Robert's eyebrows arched. You're growing cunning, Ned. Are you sure that's not your wife's Tully or your mother's Aaron blood speaking? A faint smile tugged at Ned's lips. I've learned a few things about politics since you named me Hand. Robert chuckled softly, then winced, an echo of pain from his healing side. He pressed a hand to his torso. All right, we'll let him roam free if he shows his face. For now, but set watchers on him quietly. We gather evidence, and if he's truly a threat to the throne, we pounce. They exchanged a look of agreement, then rose. Ser Barristan inclined his head, silent approval glinting in his eyes. Outside, the corridor was bright with midday sun pouring through high windows. Gold cloaks on patrol saluted as Robert and Ned passed. Your Grace, one of the guards said, standing rigid. Lord Tyrell requests a brief audience with you in the courtyard. Robert sighed. Of course he does. It's only the second time today. Is it? He glanced at Ned. We must be halfway to forging an entire Tyrell tapestry by now. Ned said nothing, but his gaze was sympathetic. Robert had been enduring near-constant meetings with the Tyrell patriarch, who was intent on securing a marriage alliance with Marjorie Tyrell. The king had yet to give a firm yes or no, perhaps because a part of him recoiled at the idea of another arranged union, or perhaps because war was on the horizon and overshadowed every domestic concern. In the courtyard, bright with midday sun, they found Mace Tyrell in conversation with Renly Baratheon. The Lord of Highgarden wore a wide-brimmed hat to shield him from the heat, and he fanned himself with an embroidered handkerchief. Renly, in a green doublet, was nodding politely at something Mace was saying. Nearby, Loras Tyrell stood at attention, glancing around with that half-alert, half-distracted look he often wore when formalities bored him. At the sight of Robert, Mace Tyrell lifted an arm in a theatrical gesture. Your Grace, good day to yo. I was just telling dear Renly here that my men stand ready to ride if you command it. Word is the Lannisters gather forces in the west. Should the realm require Highgarden's might, we are at your disposal. Robert offered a tight smile. I appreciate your eagerness, Lord Tyrell. For now, we're still awaiting final word from our scouts. Tywin Lannister might march at any time, or he might hole up in the Westerlands, hoping to lure us into a trap. In either case, we'll need your strength soon, I've no doubt. Mace's broad chest puffed out with pride. Excellent, Your Grace. I also wish to mention that my dear daughter Marjorie will arrive in just a few days. She is traveling from Highgarden with her retinue, escorted by my wife, Allery. Naturally, I hope we might arrange a meeting. He paused, searching Robert's face. If you'll allow, of course. Robert bit back a sigh. We can arrange a meeting. But with war looming, our time is short. I won't promise festivities and feasts. You'll have to settle for simpler introductions. Mace's smile faltered slightly. Of course, Your Grace. I'm sure Marjorie understands the gravity of our times. Still, I think you'll find her refreshing. Renly exchanged a quick glance with Loras, something unspoken passing between them. Ned, meanwhile, quietly took in every word, storing it away. There were so many players now. Tyrells, Baratheons of 3 branches, the disgraced Lannisters in the dungeons, and the absent Peter Baelish. Not to mention Stannis Baratheon, who had not yet arrived. Any day, they expected to see black-sailed ships from Dragonstone in Blackwater Bay. That, too, would change the delicate balance of power. After a few more pleasantries, Mace Tyrell excused himself and waddled off across the courtyard, Loras following with a short bow to the king and Ned. Renly lingered, arching an eyebrow at Robert. Well, brother, Renly said with faint amusement. Lord Tyrell never tires of pressing the marriage angle, does he? Robert snorted. He's as persistent as a flea, though far more decorative. I suppose if it helps keep the reach firmly in our camp. He trailed off, eyeing Renly's expression. But you look like you had something else to say? Renly hesitated. I hear little whispers around the court about Peter Baelish. Some folks claim he's fled to the Vale, others that he's in Bravos. There's talk you plan to arrest him on sight or even have him killed. And yet, no formal order has been proclaimed. If he was truly complicit in Ned's imprisonment and Joffrey's enthronement, why let him slip away? Ned answered in a calm tone before Robert could speak. We prefer he come to us so we can learn who else might be involved. The deeper game. Littlefinger rarely acts alone. Renly nodded thoughtfully. Fair enough. If he's truly as sly as I suspect, he might try to reappear at court to profess his loyalty. He always seems to land on his feet, no matter the storm. His mouth curved in a small, ironic smile. Take care, though, that he doesn't worm his way back into your good graces. Robert's voice was a gravelly rumble. He won't. I'm done letting vipers slither around me. With that, Renly inclined his head and strode away, likely to catch up with the Tyrells or see to other business. Robert and Ned, exchanging a look, wandered toward the training yard. Ser Barristan discreetly followed at a respectful distance. The yard was brimming with activity. Knights in padded gambesons sparring with wooden swords, archers practicing at straw targets, and squires rushing about with water and towels. Robert observed them with the practiced eye of a seasoned warrior. Many of these men had been loyal to him in name, but some had been uncertain. Now that the city was firmly under his control, the training yard bustled with a new sense of purpose and discipline. Ned folded his arms over his chest. We'll need every man at his best if the Lannisters march. The rumor is that Tywin has no fewer than 20,000 swords at his call, possibly more. Robert's lip curled. Let him bring them. I recall the rebellion, when the odds seemed stacked against us. We overcame then and will overcome now. But I'll not lie to you, Ned. This time, I sense the game is more twisted than ever. The realm has grown used to peace or what passes for it. War will be a shock. Ned's face clouded. He, too, remembered the days of open war. Terrible battles, fields strewn with corpses, all in the name of toppling the Mad King. Afterward, Robert had taken the throne, but ironically, the seeds of new strife had been planted even then. The Lannisters' cunning infiltration of power, the fracturing of old alliances. Perhaps war was a cycle that never truly ended. They turned from the training yard and made their way up a flight of worn stone steps, heading to the Tower of the Hand, where Ned had established a small war room. Inside, a great table stood covered with maps of the 7 kingdoms, miniature carved sigils representing houses arranged to reflect current known positions. A silver wolf for House Stark at Winterfell, a golden rose for Highgarden, a stag for King's Landing, and so on. A lion marker for House Lannister rested near the Golden Tooth, indicating Tywin's expected mustering ground. Robert studied the map, frowning at the uncertain lines. Our scouts report that Jaime left Harrenhal and is riding west with the bulk of his force to join Tywin. That leaves Harrenhal lightly garrisoned, but it also means the Lannisters will present a united front. We can't rely on dividing them as we might have. Ned tapped the Riverlands with a forefinger. If they move east, they'll clash with Riverrun. I've sent word to my brother-in-law, Edmure Tully, urging him to reinforce the strongholds along the Red Fork. But we can't let the fighting drag on there too long. The Riverlands suffered enough from Gregor Clegane's raids. Robert nodded. We'll raise a host here in the Crownlands. The Tyrells, as you noted, can send men up through the Rose Road to join us. We can march west in one great mass, or we can try to trap the Lannisters between us and the Tullis. That might force Tywin to negotiate. A rap on the door interrupted them. Ser Barristan opened it, admitting a slim, middle-aged man in a maester's chain. Maester Pylus, newly assigned to King's Landing after Pycelle was put under watch, stepped in. He bowed low. Your Grace, my Lord Hand, word has arrived from Dragonstone. Both men turned sharply, exchanging glances. Robert beckoned the maester closer. Well, out with it, man. Maester Pylus cleared his throat. Lord Stannis Baratheon writes that he shall soon sail for King's Landing. He pledges to come in peace, to confer with your grace on matters of the realm. He also suggests you clarify the nature of your revival. He is concerned about the influence of foreign gods. Robert rolled his eyes. Stannis and his gods, or my gods, or any gods. He always did fixate on such matters. Did he specify how large a force he's bringing? Pylus scanned the parchment. He mentions a fleet of 20 war galleys and an unspecified number of foot soldiers, likely a few thousand at most. Robert shook his head. That's enough to cause a stir if he's not truly coming in peace. But Stannis was never one for deception. I expect he's still bristling that I returned. Probably spent hours brooding about it, deciding whether I'd stolen a destiny he thought was his. Ned said gently, "He is your brother. Perhaps an open conversation will mend things. If he stands with you, that's one more pillar against the Lannisters." Robert shrugged, half in agreement, half in resignation. "We shall see. Tell him in reply that he's welcome in the capital, as a son of House Baratheon and a loyal subject of the crown. No more talk of sorcery, though. He'll hear my piece when he arrives." Maester Pylus bowed again and shuffled out. The door closed softly, leaving the king and hand amid the hush of the war room. Robert's gaze lingered on the carved stag representing King's Landing. Stannis always wanted recognition for holding Storm's End during the rebellion. He never forgot how I gave him Dragonstone instead, leaving Storm's End to Renly. I suppose I owe him a proper thanks, after all these years. Ned studied him. He's a proud man, Robert, but he's also honorable. If we handle this carefully, he'll stand with us. Then Ned's voice grew quieter. On the matter of your revival, have you considered how you'll explain it to him? Robert gave a low laugh. Should I say, "A red priestess saved me from the grave, dear brother. Come join me in praising her fire god"? That'd make his teeth grind. Stannis is devout in his own grim way. He'll have 1,000 questions. Perhaps I'll just say the boar wound wasn't as mortal as rumored. Let him believe what he wants. Ned lifted a brow but did not press the matter. The realm had never seen such a phenomenon, and Robert was not eager to discuss the details. Even Ned, who had witnessed the aftermath, sensed the taboo swirling around the subject of red magic. If rumors of necromancy gained real traction, some lords might question Robert's legitimacy despite his lineage. They continued conferring on war plans until the sun dipped behind the walls of the Red Keep. As dusk settled, they parted ways, Ned to see Sansa and Arya for supper, Robert to manage yet another round of meetings with various Crownlands lords. The specter of Peter Baelish hovered in their minds, but more urgent matters demanded attention. That night, the city bustled with an uneasy energy. Merchants in the streets whispered of war, blacksmiths hammered out new swords and spear tips, and tavern talk revolved around the possibility of Lannister retribution. Some folks repeated old gossip, that King Robert was an undead puppet, or a phantom conjured by the Red Woman to terrorize the realm. Others praised him as a blessed champion chosen to save Westeros from the golden-haired devils. Either way, people prepared for siege or flight, uncertain which direction the tides of power might turn. In the royal apartments, Ned Stark and his daughters dined in relative quiet. Arya poked at her stew, restless. She yearned to keep practicing sword forms with her wooden stick, but Ned insisted she rest. Sansa ate politely, but her face remained drawn. The trauma of almost seeing her father executed still gnawed at her. Occasionally, Ned heard her murmur about Joffrey, half in anger, half in heartbreak that all her girlish illusions had shattered so brutally. After dinner, Ned walked with them to their chambers, each step echoing in the Red Keep's labyrinth. He kissed Arya's forehead and bid her good night. She complained that she wanted to get stronger with a sword, and Ned promised he would find a way for her to continue lessons safely, though not with that Braavosi dancing master who had vanished in the chaos. Then he escorted Sansa to her chamber. She bowed her head, barely meeting his eyes, as if embarrassed by all that had transpired. Yet Ned saw determination flicker behind her courtesy. Perhaps she, too, was learning that the world was harsher than she believed. When they were settled, he made his way back through the corridors. A swirl of torchlit shadows flickered along the stone walls. Lost in thought, Ned nearly missed the figure who stepped from an alcove. It was Varys, the master of whisperers, or so he had once been, before Robert's purge of Lannister loyalists. Varys wore voluminous silks, each step eerily silent on the stone. "Lord Stark," Varys murmured in that unctuous tone, bowing low. "Might I have a moment of your time?" Ned stiffened but nodded curtly. "Be quick. It's late." Varys inclined his bald head. "I come only to share information, my lord, which may be of interest to you and his grace." Ned bristled, aware that Varys's information usually came with a price. "Speak, then. What do you know of significance?" The eunuch's voice dropped. "Some of my little birds suggest that Peter Baelish has been spotted in Gulltown, in the Vale. He was apparently welcomed by certain minor lords who owe him coin. Word is he might sail from there, or travel inland to the Eyrie, perhaps to curry favor with Lady Lisa Arryn. After all, they share a certain connection from childhood." Ned's gut clenched. Lisa's paranoia had kept her locked in the Eyrie, refusing to involve the Vale in the realm's affairs. If Littlefinger slithered there, he might exploit Lisa's fear, turning her into a pawn. "And you share this out of the goodness of your heart?" he asked quietly. Varys pressed slender fingertips together. "I share because I serve the realm, or so I like to think. If Lord Baelish seeks to stir up trouble, it could harm us all. We have enough turmoil without him adding to it." Ned studied Varys's face, searching for deception. "Do you believe Peter will come to King's Landing?" "That, Lord Stark, I cannot say. Perhaps if he fails to gain what he desires in the Vale, he'll risk returning here. Especially if he thinks he can ingratiate himself with King Robert once more." Ned paused. "And what does he desire? Power? Wealth? Both?" Varys's half-smile was knowing. "Littlefinger desires everything he can get, my lord. And if he cannot get it, he will spoil it so that no one else can have it. So you see, it might be wise to keep a watch on ships from Gulltown, or travelers along the Rose Road from the Vale. He is cunning, but your watchers could outnumber his." Ned exhaled, thinking of his earlier talk with Robert. "We appreciate the warning." He turned to go, then hesitated. "Varys, do you have any notion whether Baelish had a hand in Robert's boar hunt? Was it arranged? Somehow?" Varys spread his hands in a gesture of uncertainty. "I have heard whispers, but none conclusive. Some say wine was provided, that it was stronger than usual, that certain huntsmen were not as attentive as they should have been. Yet that could be Lannister meddling, or simply the king's own appetite for strong drink. I would not accuse Lord Baelish without proof." Ned's jaw tightened. "Thank you for your candor." Without another word, he walked on, leaving Varys behind in the flickering corridor. When he reached his own chamber, Ned paced restlessly. The knowledge that Peter Baelish might be in Gulltown brought him some relief. At least the man was not hidden within King's Landing. Yet the Vale was only a short distance away by ship or mountain pass. If Baelish convinced Lisa to close off the Vale to the crown, or to adopt some neutral or hostile stance, it could further destabilize the realm. A cornered fox was dangerous indeed. Eventually, Ned forced himself to rest. He blew out the candle and lay in the darkness, mind spinning with plans to send discreet scouts to track Baelish's movements. War loomed in the west, and a cunning snake slithered in the east. In such times, trust was a precious and dwindling resource. Over the next few days, the capital braced for multiple arrivals. Stannis Baratheon's fleet was rumored to be nearing Massey's Hook, then sailing up Blackwater Bay. Marjorie Tyrell's party was expected any time, traveling the Rose Road with a strong escort. King Robert's War Council ramped up preparations for a potential march westward, while also sending quiet messages to the Vale about neutrality or support. One late afternoon, Ned found Robert in the courtyard of Maegor's Holdfast, an enclosed space near the heart of the Red Keep. Robert was leaning heavily on a wooden practice sword, sweat coating his brow. He had been sparring with a pair of Crownland's knights, testing his strength. Though still not at his youthful peak, he showed glimpses of the raw power that had slain Rhaegar Targaryen on the Trident. His chest heaved with exertion. As Ned approached, Robert handed off the practice sword to a squire and wiped his face with a cloth. "Not as easy as it once was," he admitted. a touch of old humor in his eyes. "But I'll get there." Ned gave a faint smile. "You look better than you did before the hunt. Less bloated from wine." Robert grunted. The boar ended up saving my life in a twisted sense. Never thought I'd say that. Now come. What news?" They walked under a stone archway into a smaller bailey. Ned updated Robert on the latest letters from the Riverlands. Edmure Tully had skirmished with some advanced Lannister riders near the Red Fork. The Riverlords had secured a minor victory, capturing a few men who claimed Tywin would soon muster a great host and march east. Robert's face hardened. "We'll not sit idle. If Stannis arrives in peace, we'll incorporate his men. If Marjorie Tyrell arrives, well, we'll weigh that matter quickly, then ready ourselves to move out. Tywin might not wait for us to get all our ducks in a row." Ned nodded. "Agreed. Perhaps we should move the bulk of our forces to Rosby or Duskendale in the Crownlands, closer to the roads west. Let the city watch guard King's Landing with your chosen men. If the worst happens and the Lannisters try a lightning strike, we can meet them in open field." Robert paused, looking at the distant spires. It might be wise. If the city is threatened, the people might panic. Best to keep the fighting away from the capital." Then his gaze flicked to Ned. "We'll do this, but I'll keep a careful eye out for any sign of Baelish meddling. If he somehow convinces the Vale to join the Lannisters, that changes our entire strategy." Ned stiffened. The Vale siding with the Lannisters would be a worst-case scenario. Lisa has no love for House Lannister. She blames them for many past ills, but she is flighty and easily led by fear. If Baelish manipulates her into believing we pose a threat, well, it could lock the Vale away from us, or even turn it hostile. Robert clenched a fist. "We can't fight on two fronts. Not with winter on the horizon." They reached a corner of the bailey where two gnarled trees provided shade. Robert sank onto a stone bench, wincing slightly. He gestured for Ned to sit as well. "Tell me," he asked, voice quieter now, "do you truly think we can handle all of this? War in the west, uncertain Vale, possible new alliances with the Reach, my fractious brothers, and the threat of that cunning bastard Baelish creeping about in the shadows? Sometimes I wonder if the Seven Kingdoms would be better off if we all just pounded each other's heads in once and for all." Ned forced a tired smile. "We'll handle it because we must. We did not choose these burdens lightly, Robert. You took the throne to save the realm from the Mad King, and now you're being asked to save it again from division and intrigue. You're still the best hope for uniting the lords, especially now that the illusions around Joffrey have been shattered." Robert scrubbed a hand through his hair. "It does feel different this time. Before I was a conqueror. Now I'm what? A second-chance king? Maybe that's enough. Maybe the realm needs a man who won't squander the throne again." Ned rose, placing a steady hand on Robert's shoulder. "We'll see it through." With that, he left Robert to his thoughts and returned to the Tower of the Hand to dispatch more letters. The next morning dawned hot and hazy. A flurry of excitement rippled through the Red Keep. A column of riders was spotted approaching the main gate, bearing the golden rose of House Tyrell. Word spread that Lady Marjorie Tyrell had arrived in King's Landing. Servants rushed to prepare suitable chambers. The Tyrell Knights formed a small parade in the outer ward. King Robert with Ned Sta, Arke, Renly Baratheon, and Mace Tyrell awaited the newcomers at the inner courtyard. A tapestry of watchers formed along the edges, curious to see the woman rumored to be as fair as any in the Seven Kingdoms. To quote Mace's frequent boasts, presently the gate swung open. A line of riders trotted in, green-cloaked guards, a few ladies in traveling dresses, and at the center, two carriages. From the first carriage stepped Allery Hightower, Mace's wife, a dignified woman of middle years. The second carriage's door opened, and Marjorie Tyrell emerged. A young woman with softly curled brown hair, high cheekbones, and bright eyes that took in the scene with keen awareness. She wore a pale green gown embroidered with tiny golden roses at the sleeves, and she moved with practiced grace. Mace Tyrell bustled forward, beaming. "My dear wife, my dear daughter, welcome to King's Landing." He offered them each a hand to alight from the carriage. Lady Alarie curtsied to King Robert, and Marjorie followed suit, her gaze rising to meet the king's. Robert, for his part, stood a bit stiffly, uncertain how to greet her in the face of so many watchers. But he offered a polite nod. "Lady Marjorie, welcome. We trust your journey was swift." She smiled with a warm composure that belied her youth. "Yes, your grace. Swift and without danger, thanks to my father's men. I'm honored to be here in the city that stands at the heart of the realm." The formalities continued a moment, with Alarie Hightower thanking Robert for his hospitality. Marjorie cast an occasional glance at Ned Stark and at Renly Baratheon, as though sizing them up. Her eyes lingered on Renly a moment longer, and a flicker of understanding passed over her features. Perhaps she knew of the close bond between him and her brother Loras. Then she turned her attention back to the king, smiling demurely. Robert cleared his throat. "We'll see you to your quarters shortly. I imagine you'll want time to rest. The city can be overwhelming after the countryside." "Thank you, your grace. I am eager to see more of the Red Keep once I've refreshed myself," Marjorie replied in a gentle tone. With that, Mace led his family deeper into the castle. Renly followed, exchanging a few words with Marjorie in a soft voice that Ned could not catch. Ned, standing near Robert, remarked, "She seems poised, considering the circumstances." Robert nodded absently. She has a certain presence. The Tyrells might not have exaggerated for once." Then he glanced at Ned. "But I'll not leap to the wedding bed. We have wars to prevent." Ned inclined his head. "As you say, your grace." The day wore on, and Marjorie's arrival dominated court gossip. Some marveled at her beauty and courtesy. Others muttered that she was another Cersei in the making, a cunning manipulator. Still others saw an opportunity for the realm's stability if Robert named her his queen and produced an uncontested heir. Indeed, the question of succession loomed large. Tommen and Myrcella remained in the castle, but their bastard status barred them from the line, and Joffrey's future seemed more uncertain than ever. By late afternoon, Ned found himself summoned to a private gathering in the Queen's ballroom, an elegant chamber with tall windows and golden drapes. The name still referred to the days of Cersei's queenship, though that title now rang hollow. There, Ned joined Robert, Mace Tyrell, and Marjorie. Ser Barristan stood discreetly near one wall, ever watchful. A pair of servants brought chilled wine and fruit tarts, then departed, leaving the four of them in relative privacy. Mace Tyrell cleared his throat. "Your Grace, I hope you'll forgive a father's pride if I propose that Marjorie speak with you alone. I can always wait outside." Robert glanced at Ned, then offered Mace a weary smile. "Lord Stark is my hand. I'd like him to remain if we discuss matters of state." Marjorie's expression held no sign of offense. "I understand, your grace." She stepped forward slightly. "I thought perhaps we should speak plainly about our family's hopes. My father has told me you are uncertain about a new marriage." Robert arched a brow, somewhat impressed by her directness. "I am, not because I doubt your worth, my lady, but because the realm stands on the brink of war. I've no wish to parade a wedding feast while Tywin Lannister marches his armies." Her eyes softened. "I understand. War is a grim business, and I do not wish to see the small folk suffer. Still, a wedding can sometimes unite lords and quell hostilities. My father believes it may strengthen your hold on the throne by demonstrating stability and ensuring an heir." Ned watched the interplay carefully. Marjorie was treading a fine line, respecting Robert's authority while gently pressing her own viewpoint. He could see why the Tyrells prized her as a diplomat. Robert's face remained stoic. Mace Tyrell wrung his hands. Yes, precisely. If I may be bold, your grace, you've seen how the people hungered for a sense of continuity after your alleged death. Now that you stand reborn, so to speak, a public marriage might show them that the future is secure. A child of House Baratheon and House Tyrell would be a beacon of unity. Robert took a slow sip of wine, eyes flicking to Ned. Finally, he said, "I hear your point, Lord Tyrell. Lady Marjorie, you speak well. But understand that I cannot promise anything this day." He set the goblet down with a measured calm. If we defeat the Lannisters or force them to bend the knee, then we can discuss a new queen for Westeros. For now, the war must come first. Marjorie lowered her lashes in polite acquiescence. I shall respect your decision, Your Grace. In the meantime, I'd be happy to assist the realm in any way I can. Perhaps I can use my presence to reassure certain lords who waver. Highgarden's name carries weight. Robert studied her. You speak as though you're well-versed in politics. How old are you, my lady? 17, Your Grace, she replied steadily. Mace jumped in. She is quite learned, thanks to septas and maesters at Highgarden. She's become a favorite among the small folk there as well. A faint smirk touched Robert's lips. 17. I was younger than that when I took up the Warhammer in the rebellion. The realm does force us all to grow quickly sometimes. He paused, weighing something unspoken. Very well. Remain at court. Speak with the lords. Show them that House Tyrell stands with me. That alone might be worth 1,000 swords. Marjorie curtsied. I shall do my best, Your Grace. Ned cleared his throat softly. If I might suggest, Lady Marjorie, the city's charitable houses, those that feed the hungry, could benefit from your presence. After the chaos with Joffrey's false reign, many small folk lost what little they had. Her face lit with genuine warmth. I'd be honored to help, if the king permits. Robert gave a small nod. I do so. The less unrest in the streets, the better. The meeting ended amicably. Mace Tyrell escorted Marjorie out, bowing and thanking the king repeatedly. When they were gone, Robert exhaled, sinking into a chair. She's clever. Not a fool like some pampered lord's daughter. Ned agreed quietly. Yes, she might be a good influence in these uncertain times. But it's your choice, Robert. No one can force you to wed again. A hint of tired resignation crossed Robert's face. We'll see. For now, let her do what good she can. If it helps keep the Tyrell swords behind me, so be it. That evening, a herald's horn blared from the city walls, announcing the sighting of sails on Blackwater Bay bearing the fiery heart of the Lord of Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon's fleet had come. Robert donned a light mail shirt and cloak, then led a contingent of gold cloaks to the docks. Ned accompanied him, along with Ser Barristan. Moonlight shone on the waters of Blackwater Bay, reflecting off the sleek hulls of war galleys bearing Stannis's personal sigil. A crowned stag within the flaming heart of the Lord of Light, an emblem adopted under Melisandre's counsel. Lanterns bobbed along the quays as the first galley moored. A gangplank thudded onto the dock. Stannis Baratheon stepped off, clad in dark, unadorned plate. His jaw was set in its perpetual scowl, his baldric bearing the new sigil. A handful of his knights followed, each carrying the same stern demeanor. Robert stepped forward, arms at his sides, neither offering an embrace nor raising a weapon. Stannis, he rumbled, voice echoing over the water. Welcome to King's Landing. Stannis studied his brother's face in the lantern glow. Robert, he said curtly. So, you live. A hush fell. Neither man moved to close the distance. Ned stood behind Robert, watchful. Ser Barristan's expression was unreadable. Stannis seemed uncertain whether to greet Robert with relief, resentment, or suspicion. Robert let out a short exhale. I do. I owe my life, apparently, to the same red woman who's been whispering in your ear. She found me half dead and dragged me back. Stannis's eyes flicked to Ned, then to Barristan, as if seeking confirmation. Melisandre claimed a great destiny awaited the one chosen by Lawloress Flame. I believe that meant me. It seems she meant you. His tone bordered on bitterness. Robert forced a small grin. Well, if it makes you feel better, I'm not about to start praising her god, but I do thank her. It's a strange debt to have. Stannis's mouth tightened. I've not come here to debate gods, brother. I came to see if you truly want me at your side, or if this is but a ploy to keep me under watch. I've long suspected you were never eager to share power. Robert's temper flared, but Ned quickly intervened. Lord Stannis, as Hand of the King, I can attest that Robert welcomes your help. We face war with the Lannisters, and the realm needs all loyal Baratheon swords. We also face other uncertainties. Stannis's hard glare softened a fraction. If the realm's at war, I will do my duty as I always have. He paused, lowering his voice. But I warn you, Robert, if this resurrection of yours is an unholy abomination. Oh, enough, Stannis, Robert growled. Yes, I died. Yes, I live again. If you wish to wring your hands about it, do so. But I'd prefer you help me defend the realm from Tywin Lannister's ambitions. Let us speak in the keep, not the docks. Stannis inclined his head stiffly. Very well. He turned to his men. Marsh the rest of our party. We go to the Red Keep. I trust there's lodging enough for my knights. Robert nodded curtly, stepping aside to let Stannis pass. A swirl of tension lingered in the air, but at least the meeting did not devolve into outright hostility. Ned silently exhaled. The last thing they needed was a Baratheon civil war on top of everything else. They rode up through the city, torches illuminating crooked streets. The people peered from windows and doorways, murmuring at the sight of another Baratheon lord come to King's Landing. Some recognized Stannis and spat at the mention of the foreign god his priestess worshipped. Others cheered, calling out that House Baratheon was uniting to punish the Lannisters. The night brimmed with swirling rumors. At the gates of the Red Keep, Stannis dismounted. Ned offered to show him to new apartments, away from the old rooms once given to Renly. Stannis nodded tersely, and they ascended the steps. Robert parted with them, explaining that he would meet Stannis in the morning for a full council. Tired and still somewhat raw, Robert needed time to gather his wits before wrestling with his brother's unyielding pride. Ned led Stannis to a suite that overlooked the sea. As they walked, they passed several Red Keep servants who bowed low. Stannis's gaze flicked around the castle corridors. You've rehung the Baratheon banners. Good. The Lannister lion had no place dominating these walls. Ned nodded. It was your brother's decree. He's reclaimed the city after the revelations about Joffrey's parentage. They halted at the door to Stannis's new quarters. Before entering, Stannis turned back. Lord Stark, is it true that Peter Baelish fled the city? Ned's brow creased. It is. Why do you ask? Stannis's expression was stony. I have reason to believe he corresponded with certain men on Dragonstone, offering bribes if they would support Joffrey's claim. When I discovered this, it was too late. He'd vanished from my island spies. I suspect he might try to sow chaos between us, or to undermine Robert's authority at a crucial moment. Ned felt a chill. He's been a problem for some time. You have my word. We're watching for him. Stannis gave a curt nod. Good. We'll speak more on the morrow, Lord Stark. With that, he retreated into the rooms, and Ned left him to settle. The news that Baelish had tried to bribe some on Dragonstone only reinforced the scope of Littlefinger's manipulations. The man truly had a hand in every pot, and might try to kindle resentments between the Baratheon brothers if it served him. For now, though, Ned was thankful that Stannis seemed willing to fight alongside Robert. They needed every sword for the looming confrontation with Tywin Lannister. Dawn broke over King's Landing, and the Red Keep's halls stirred with new purpose. The War Council convened in the throne room, a swirl of heralds, knights, and lords gathering around Robert and Ned. Stannis stood to one side, posture rigid, while Renly mingled with Mace Tyrell near the dais. A handful of other lords, including some Crownland's bannermen and the newly arrived Stormlords, filled the space. A map of the Seven Kingdoms had been unrolled across a large table set before the Iron Throne. Carved figurines represented known troop movements. The Lion of Lannister was reported at the Golden Tooth, swelling with new recruits under Jaime's command, while Tywin readied from Casterly Rock. Robert stood at the head of the table, wearing a black and gold doublet, his bandaged side hidden from view but still quietly troubling him. We have confirmation that Tywin Lannister has called all his bannermen. The Westerlands are prepared for war. Jaime has joined him with men from Harrenhal. Together, they might field 30,000 or more. The Riverlands are mustering at Riverrun, but the Tullus alone cannot hold back such a force indefinitely. Ned pointed to the map. We propose to gather our combined host, Crownlands, Stormlands, and Reach, in the fields near Rosby. If the Tyrells bring a sizable force, we can march west to Harrenhal, secure it, and then threaten Tywin from the flank. Meanwhile, Edmure Tully defends Riverrun and the Red Fork. If Tywin chooses to push east, we'll have him pinned. Renly glanced at Mace Tyrell. Can Highgarden truly muster enough men in time, my lord? Mace puffed up. We can. I've already dispatched orders for another 10,000 to march north. Loras can help lead them if you wish. We must, of course, ensure their safe passage through the King's Road. My men will be traveling swiftly. Stannis folded his arms, eyeing the map. I can commit 2,000 foot and 500 mounted knights from Dragonstone. The rest remain on my ships. We can blockade Lannisport if need be, harrying Tywin's supply lines. Robert stroked his beard. A blockade? That might force Tywin to quick action if he's starved of trade from the sea. But let's not overextend. We can't let the Iron Islands see a chance to raid the Reach or the Westerlands if our fleets are all tied up in Lannisport. A lively discussion ensued, lords chiming in with concerns about supply routes, the best roads for travel, how to keep the capital protected. Amid the strategic talk, Ned stayed vigilant, noting the interplay between Stannis' cold stares, Renly's easy charm, and Mace's blustering confidence. Robert listened to them all but made it clear that the final decision rested with him. Near the end of the council, Varys slipped in, quietly delivering a small parchment to Ned. He read it, lips pressing thin, then beckoned Robert aside. When Robert stepped away from the table, Ned held out the note. Word from the Vale. Peter Baelish was indeed seen in Gulltown, but he left by ship. No one knows his exact destination. One rumor claims he headed for Bravos, another that he's making for Maidenpool in the Riverlands. He's elusive. Robert exhaled in frustration. Damn him. If he's making for the Riverlands, he might try to ingratiate himself with Edmure Tully or with Tywin. If he's going to Bravos, the Iron Bank might be involved. The man always said money buys influence, in that sly tone of his. Ned lowered his voice. Shall we issue a warrant for his arrest in every port? Robert paused, glancing back at the lords still poring over the map. No, not yet. Spread the word discreetly that if he's spotted, we want to know, but we do not want him scared off. We need to see what he aims to do, which alliances he's courting. Ned nodded. As you wish, Your Grace. They returned to the council table. The group hammered out further details, forging a plan for immediate mobilization, ensuring supply wagons traveled north toward Rosby, deciding which lords would remain in King's Landing to guard the city. Mace Tyrell excused himself to write urgent letters. Stannis retreated to coordinate naval matters with a few of his captains. Renly lingered, exchanging murmured words with Loras Tyrell, whose face lit with quiet eagerness at the chance to lead a portion of the host of the Reach. At last, the throne room emptied save for Robert, Ned, Ser Barristan, and a few guards. Robert sat heavily on the Iron Throne's edge, as if the weight of it pressed upon him. Ned stood below, arms folded. Ser Barristan hovered near a pillar, stoic as always. Robert's gaze was distant. We'll move soon. Tywin might try to outmaneuver us, but if we strike first, we can keep him off balance. And if that cunning wretch Baelish tries to intervene? Ned met his eyes. We'll be ready. Robert nodded slowly. Yes, we'll be ready. He paused, glancing at the metal spikes surrounding him on the throne. I'm not that complacent fool who let the realm decay under the Lannisters' shadow. Not anymore. Ned felt a flicker of pride in his friend's resolve. The next few weeks will test us, Robert, more than ever before. But we have good men and a just cause. We can see it done. Robert heaved a breath, then forced himself to stand, ignoring the protest of old wounds. He said softly, looking down at Ned. Let's prepare the realm for the war to come, and watch for any sign of the sly fox in the shadows. They exited the throne room together, stepping into the corridor lit by high windows. Sunlight spilled across the floor, catching the glint of the stag sigils newly woven into the tapestries. Outside, the city thrummed with apprehension and hope in equal measure. King Robert Baratheon, once a doomed man, now strode with renewed purpose beside his oldest friend. Far beyond the walls, in lands west and east, the pieces moved across the chessboard of Westeros. Tywin Lannister mustering his forces, Stannis positioning his fleet, Renly forging alliances with the Tyrells, and Petyr Baelish lurking in the shadows, seeking any opening to exploit. No one could say how the storm would break, or whether a second chance was truly enough to save the Seven Kingdoms from itself. But for now, the resurrected king and the Lord of Winterfell were determined to face every threat, be it a lion's roar or a whisper of betrayal, and see the realm endure.